Chapter 6:17. There was only one Grandmaster from Jiaodong Commandery left unharmed in the air. In extreme shock and fury, this Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster's lips were pressed together, and the primal energies of the universe came out of his mouth to make a whistling sound. The sound wasn't loud or sharp, but it was very rhythmic and had amazing penetrating power. The whistling sound rippled in the air like countless arrows moving in the air. It even brought out countless white whirlpools, like white foam on the surface of the sea. Like an echo, many strange roars came from the forest in the distance at the same time. Moisture rose, and some faint lights were flickering. The distorted lights and shadows were like innumerable indomitable monsters swaying and dancing under the heaven and earth sword. What is this? Zhangsun Qianxue frowned deeply. She turned to ask Ding Ning with a grave expression. In her perception, along with the appearance of those distorted and flickering shadows, there was also a terrifying aura that seemed to come from the primordial era. It is a soaring snake. Before Ding Ning could speak, Yantai Guanjin said softly and simply, "It actually..." Zhangsun Qianxue only said 2 words. The soaring snake was not a snake, but a monster of legend. It was one of the strongest beasts of the sea, a type of serpent dragon. Most serpents that could fly relied on wings, flesh wings, or the wide fins of some fish in the sea to glide. But this kind of beast was like an enormous python. Other than the triangular black scales wrapped around its body, it did not look any different from ordinary snakes. It could easily fly, relying on its use of primal energies of the universe. Its control of primal energies of the universe could cause it to create wind and rain, and make its enormous body light. Extremely tough keratin armor, in the cultivation world long ago, was directly used by cultivators to make armor able to resist the cutting of most sharp objects in the world, even able to directly resist some types of primal energies of the universe. This kind of beast was not something the present night demon apes could compare to. Simply speaking, the so-called serpent was a reference used in the cultivation world to divide the power of Realm 6 and Realm 7 cultivators. Most Realm 6 cultivators in the world could not kill a serpent on their own. Only Realm 7 grandmasters could enter the wind and rain, break through the cold ponds or deep sea, and fight the serpent. What made Zhangsun Qianxue's emotions complicated was that the terrifying presence from the twisting shadows was not just 1 or 2. In the cultivation world she was familiar with more than a decade ago. Even if Jiaodong Commandery had mastered some powerful sea beasts, they did not have the ability to control a group of soaring snakes like this. What infuriated and displeased her the most was that the woman she hated the most in Changling always had a backup plan. Just when she felt the other had used all her moves, the other would always have a backup plan, as though there was no end to it. Don't! At this time, the Jiaodong Commandery cultivator, who had been forced by Yantai Guanjin to use all of his vital energy and primal energies of the universe to protect himself, looked up at the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster, who was summoning the soaring serpent. Then he shouted, "It is useless now." His status seemed to surpass the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster in the air. Hearing his 2 shouts, the Grandmaster, who was whistling furiously in the air, suddenly stopped. The whistling stopped immediately. This was undoubtedly the correct choice. These serpents were powerful, but Tantai Guanjin's power had not been used to a certain extent. When Tantai Guanjin was still strong, his sword essence could kill many serpents like this. But when he was as weak as Zhangsun Qianxue, these serpents could show their terror. Hearing these people's conversation and shouts, Fu Su's mind was shaken. Changling was like a hotbed, and this kind of place of life and death was promoting his rapid growth. People like Zhangsun Qianxue and Yantai Guanjin were extremely powerful in his view. Usually, if there was a cultivator like this, It would be enough to completely change the situation of a side. But in front of the power of Jiaodong Commandery, this kind of cultivator seemed minuscule. What was likely to happen now was, when these powerful enemies were used up, there would be a group of top Realm 6 serpents waiting for them. Only then would they enter battle. At that time, the scales and power of the serpents would show their power. I really do not want to kill you. Tantai Guanjian looked at the quickly fading shadows in the distant forest. He looked at the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster, who was almost out of energy, and said, "Seriously, we are all Qin people, and it is not easy to cultivate." This was not an exaggeration or pretense. He had been merciful in his previous attack. He had only pierced the energy seas of the two cultivators, and had not killed them. The Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster knew what he meant, but when he met Tantai Guanjian's gaze, the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster said directly, "I am prepared to die. You cannot change the result, even if you kill us. Both the remaining night demon apes and the soaring snakes are controlled by someone. She will take revenge for us." As Tantai Guanjian frowned slightly, the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster said firmly, "From now on, Min Mountain Sword Sect will be Jiaodong Commandery's mortal enemy. Min Mountain Sword Sect will quickly be uprooted from Chongling, and the sect will cease to exist." When his voice filled with determination and viciousness rang out, the night demon apes that were originally falling like rain instead scattered in all directions, leaving this region of the sky first. Tantai Guanjian's eyes lit up. He attacked. The only remaining Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster in the sky screamed, the air behind him shattering like a mirror. With a soft pop, 3 Tantai Guanjian's figures flashed around him. This soft sound came from his energy sea. A bloody mist bloomed in his energy sea like a bright flower. Tantai Guanjian's figure returned to Ding Ning's side in the next moment, but a sword essence still flowed in the darkness. The energy sea of the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster, who was almost out of energy, was pierced by the sword essence. Tantai Guanjian had not killed one person, but destroyed the cultivation of all these grandmasters. How many people can there be? Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Tantai Guanjian, who had a calm, but gradually paled face, and asked. Tantai Guanjian responded, 2. No more than 7 swords. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at him and said, "This is what some people speculated about you back then. They speculated that your greatest power was to kill 7 Realm 7 Grandmasters in a row." Tantai Guanjian was silent for a moment and said, "This speculation is correct. The ones who made the speculation back then were the Jiaodong Commandery Zheng family that we call country people." Zhang Sun Qianxue took a deep breath and said, "If their speculations about you are correct, then their speculations about the other people of Min Mountain Sword Sect should also be correct." Tantai Guanjian knew what she meant. After a moment of silence, he said, "But I still know that Senior Sect Brother Bailey will still make such a choice." Ding Ning took a deep breath. He slowly looked up, thinking of many things in the past. Thinking of that jar of wine, his nose felt sore. At this time, there was a soft pop. This sound came from the Donghu monk who was sitting cross-legged. This sound also came from his energy sea. The previous sound represented the rupture of his energy sea, the return of countless years of bitter cultivation. But this time, the sound came from the depths of his energy sea. It was as if something had been broken and then reconstructed. A wave of energy was expanding endlessly in his body. Chapter 6:18. There was a calm lake deep in the Een Mountain. The lake was high up in the mountain. The water was blue, milky, and creamy. It was surrounded by trees, and the surface of the water did not ripple, like they were responding to each other. When there was a soft pop in the Donghu monk's body, there was also a soft pop in the calm lake. A unique presence was released. A glowing bubble floated up from the bottom of the lake, and then exploded the moment it was dehydrated, turning into a wisp of clear energy. This lake was hundreds of miles away from the Donghu monk, but at this time, the Donghu monk could clearly sense it. That wisp of clear energy appeared directly in his energy sea. Like a seed, clear energy formed in his energy sea, passed through his body, and carried his consciousness outwards, reaching infinitely high and passing through the world. The Donghu monk went to many places he had never been before. He was instantly in a vast desert without water, and then in the depths of a volcano, or at the bottom of an extremely cold lake. He saw many life and death that he usually could not see, the astounding reproduction of insects, the residual energies, and effects of some powerful beasts after their deaths. He was dazed like he was among the stars, and saw many flowing stars and starlight pass through his body, like they were piercing his soul, passing through the unknown. Seeing countless things in an instant, there was great terror inside. But the Donghu monk, still sitting cross-legged on the ground, felt endless joy. He clearly knew what had happened. In this moment he was full of smiles and unspeakably benevolent, while he had not opened his eyes. He knew that his appearance right now was no different from the great sages recorded in the Buddhist scriptures. What is this feeling? Ding Ning knew what had happened. He turned to look at the old monk and felt joy for the old monk. The old monk opened his eyes in joy and bowed to Ding Ning with his palms together. He said softly and simply, seeing all beings. Then he added, "It was as if I had seen God." Just these words, but for Yantai Guanjian and Zhangsun Qianxue, they were accurate descriptions. The two of them naturally thought of some scenes and felt something. Everything is relative. Being too fast or too slow is like changing time and seeing a different world. Ding Ning nodded to the old monk and replied softly. The old monk and Ding Ning's conversation was filled with countless opportunities. After saying this, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. The old monk stood up. When he stood up, the sky seemed to brighten a little. His figure seemed to expand endlessly, and a transparent holy light filled the entire world. The thousands of night demon apes were furiously fleeing. After Min Mountain Sword Sect interfered, the Jiaodong Commandery Grandmaster did not want these beasts raised by Jiaodong Commandery to die needlessly, and wanted to leave these beasts for a suitable time. However, just like how the lake in the depths of Een Mountain quickly returned to eternal calm after a bubble appeared, the chaotic world became absolutely calm at this moment. Light and time seemed to be frozen in this moment. The thousands of night demon apes in the air were all still in the air. The old monk's body shook. Bright light came down from the sky and merged into his meridians that seemed to have expanded countless times. Many lights did not fall straight down, but twisted in the air. Only from a great distance could one see that there seemed to be a huge staff in the sky. The thousands of night demon apes were suddenly pressed down dozens of feet in the air. They seemed to have been pressed down by the shadow of the staff formed by the light, but with this pressure, these night demon apes turned into bloody mist. Their weakest organs were crushed and seeped out of their mouths, noses, and skin. In the night, these vicious beasts turned into balls of blood, blooming in the air and then falling down. This was a scene from the purgatory of gods and demons, but the grand energies, perfect flows of energy, and profound transformations in this instant were extremely beautiful to the cultivators present. This kind of power that could overturn the world came from the natural changes, and the response of the world when the Donghu monk broke through to Realm 8. In this moment, time seemed to follow the will of the heavens, and was perfect. Even though the Donghu monk had truly reached Realm 8, he could not control such great power. Supreme One. There were many pairs of eyes looking at this grand scene in the night. When the thousands of night demon apes were pressed down by the giant staff and turned into bloody mist, a cultivator carrying a sword box called out worriedly to Yi Xiao in front of him. Behind Yi Xiao and him, there were many cultivators carrying sword boxes like him. Chaotic sword essences collided in the sword boxes. Each cultivator, like him, seemed to be carrying a snowstorm. Supreme Venerable was also an ancient title among the old aristocratic families, which represented absolute respect and submission. In the previous dynasty and the former Chongling, among the old nobility, many cultivators were not retainers, but eternal slaves. These cultivators were the sword slaves of the old nobility, and were no different from death warriors. They would not serve two masters, and were extremely loyal. Many would commit suicide when their masters died. No matter. Yi Xiao knew better than this sword slave what had changed in the Donghu monk. He knew what this sword slave was worried about, but he still shook his head indifferently. His eyes that were usually as calm as the deep sea burned with a hot flame. I did not think that I had the ability to kill them alone. I only need to trap them, and someone will naturally come to kill them. After saying this, he reached out with his hand. At this time, he was still far from Ding Ning and the others, because he had deliberately hidden his presence. Even the Donghu monk had not sensed his threat. But at this time, the Donghu monk opened the sky and sensed the light. There were primal energies of the universe furiously surging towards that place. He could use this to confirm the exact location of the Donghu monk, Ding Ning, and the others. When he stretched out his hand, all of the true essence in his body rushed out from his fingertips. His white jade-like skin exploded. Strands of blood and vital energy passed through all the sword cases like red zither strings. The sword boxes on the backs of the sword slaves behind him exploded, and all the swords inside flew out. In this moment, the Donghu monk sensed something. Countless sword shapes appeared in his mind. Each was a famed sword, and gave off different but equally astounding sword energies. What is it? Ding Ning, Zhang Sun Qianxue, and the others felt his seriousness. Ding Ning could not help but ask. The Donghu monk did not respond because he did not need to. The dozens of sword slaves fell to the ground in exhaustion. When the sword boxes on their backs shattered, all the energy in their bodies flooded into the swords on their backs. Other cultivators would only cultivate one life-bond sword in their lives, but these sword slaves raised these swords for their entire lives. At this time, they seemed to have poured their entire lives into these swords. All of these swords flew up. Following Yi Xiao's gaze, they landed in the world where the Donghu monk and Ding Ning were. Almost 1,000 swords flew in the air. The sword energies between the flying swords were solid, like a sword mountain falling from the sky. Chapter 6:19. Compared to the vastness of the sky. These swords were very small, but like the stars in the sky, they gave people a sense of majesty and mystery. If the swords could give people the feeling of the stars, it meant that they were powerful. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked up at the sword lights. The 9 Hell King sword in her hand hummed softly. Why are there so many swords? Why is it like this? She had not recovered from the shocking scene of the Donghu monk reaching Realm 8, and now she was in an incomprehensible shock. Because they are familiar. Ding Ning looked at her beautiful profile, and the 9 Hell King sword in her hand that was reacting naturally. He took a deep breath and said, because these swords were once enemies of the 9 Hell King sword, or comrades. Or, from a certain point of view, the 9 Hell King sword was once a part of these swords. It is the night owl. Zhang Sun Qianxue reacted, and felt uncomfortable. These are the famed swords of the previous dynasty and the old Chongling. Ding Ning nodded. In each era, each dynasty, there would be many outstanding craftsmen and many top cultivators who created many famed swords. In the past, The Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties had many famed swords. After the three dynasties were destroyed, the famed swords of the three dynasties belonged to the Qin dynasty and finally appeared in the Sword Valley of the Min Mountain Sword Trials. The Bazin Kendo ground had many famed swords. After the Bazin Kendo ground was destroyed, the sword hoard belonged to Yuanwu and Zhengxiu. There were also the famed swords of the old nobility that should not be ignored but had been forgotten. In reality, the old nobility had ruled the Qin dynasty for many years. In this long period of time, these old nobility had the strongest cultivators and also created many famed swords. Things that could be chosen as swords by powerful cultivators were not ordinary, especially when most of them were nurtured as life bond items. Even after the sword owner died, these swords seemed to be branded with a soul or tempered and strengthened. Naturally, the life bond energy of the sword owner would merge with the sword and become a part of the sword itself. In the era of the old nobility of Chongling, the Gongsun family was the leader of the old nobility, and the Nine-Hell King sword was the strongest and most vicious sword of the old nobility. In the last 100 years, the cultivators of the Gongsun family used this sword to kill many cultivators and fought with many swords. Although no one had been able to refine the Nine-Hell King sword into a life-bound sword, the close contact or battle with these swords had caused the Nine-Hell King sword to have a trace of the energy of these famous swords. At this moment, these Yuan Qi imprints were resonating with each other. This was what Ding Ning meant by familiarity. Without a doubt, regardless of whether it was due to Zhengxiu's help or Yi Zhao's own doing, most of the famed swords left behind by the old nobility had fallen into the hands of the present Yi Zhao. These swords had been nurtured by the sword slaves for their entire lives. Under Yi Zhao's control, they showed great and mysterious power, forming a sword formation that even Zhongsun Qianxue could not understand. The Donghu monk's brow furrowed deeply. 3 knife-like wrinkles appeared on his tree-like skin. These swords flew one after another in the air, forming the shape of a mountain. But in his perception, there were thousands of overlapping mountains. The primal energies of the universe that each sword pulled informed a mountain. He could sense that this sword formation was not a killing formation, but a trapping maze formation. Cultivators of any level had a unique perception of danger. Right now, the Donghu monk had reached Realm 8, and his connection with energy had reached the stars. His perception of the surrounding world was very detailed, and he could even see the life and death of many beings from the remnant energy. In his perception, some things flowed faster than normal, and some things became slower than normal. Regardless of whether it was fast or slow, it was different from normal, and it was like changing the boundaries of time. The Donghu monk had said to Ding Ning, when he had his breakthrough, to see all beings was not just seeing many things he could not usually sense, and wandering to many places like his soul had left his body. The true meaning was to sense the life and death of many beings. As to seeing a god, it was saying that when one reached Realm 8, it was like reaching the domain of a god. It was a completely different world, and one could look at the world with a different gaze. With his power, he could kill many Realm 7 grandmasters and escape without being stopped. He could move unhindered in the world. But even so, he still felt great danger. Clang! His hands waved upwards. The staff in his hand became bright and transparent. He did not speak, but when the staff hit the air, it gave off a strange and clear roar like a Buddhist chant. Different cultivation methods had different scenes of opening the heavens. When the Yuanwu Emperor used all his power, there was an enormous and bright pillar of light coming down. But when he used all his power now, there were countless small and beautiful stars in the sky, but there were no dazzling stars falling down like goddesses scattering flowers. But the true feeling of power came from his own body. An invisible but real power was constantly expanding from his body, as if his entire body was constantly expanding. Crack, crack, crack. The falling sword tips suddenly encountered resistance. They did not rub against the air, but collided directly like they hit a wall of Vajra, and gave off the sound of hard objects hitting each other. A true, transparent Vajra wall appeared in the world. This was a defensive method of the Donghu monks, but at this time it was not just defense in the hands of the Donghu monk. Under his resolute gaze, this invisible but real Vajra wall was forcefully squeezing outwards at a terrifying speed. Those swords vibrated. Because of the unique mental connection, those sword slaves who had fallen to the ground were bleeding from their orifices and were on the verge of death. Beads of blood were oozing out of every pore on the night owl's body. He sensed the terrifying power from a realmmate. Everything in his body was reminding him that he could die at any moment, but a strange and disdainful smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. His body could not bear it, but his powerful resolve caused him to raise his hand and grip the air. Many blood vessels appeared on his forehead. They shone, and then they ignited with true flames. They were like red and gold symbols. The mental power he had imprinted on those famed swords also started to burn. The seal scripts of each sword struggling in the air lit up and burned with gold and red flames. Pew, 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 pew. All the famed swords collapsed in the air like paper swords, but all the energy still gathered into the shape of swords and fell with even greater power. In the senses of Ding Ning and Zhang Sun, Qian Xue, the Donghu monk who was enormous in this moment, almost filling the world, was pierced by these swords. The Vajra wall was broken, and countless invisible swords that had lost their embryos fell. Every sword strike smashed on the ground with the weight of a mountain, raising a cloud of dust that was thousands of feet high. The Donghu monk's staff landed on the ground in front of him. The storm spun around them, but could not enter. Having not spoken for a long time, Fu Su, who was the weakest, felt his consciousness being torn apart by two kinds of power. He spat out another mouthful of blood and fainted. The clouds of dust stood in the air, supported by the energy, and did not dissipate. Ding Ning looked out and saw that there were thousands of mountains around him. Some of the light from the surging primal energies flashed on the mountain peaks like tiny lightning bolts, causing the tops of these dust mountains to become dim yellow and snowy white, like the sunset snow of thousands of mountains. This was what he was worried about the most. People who only lived for revenge were always the most terrifying. Chapter 620. The Donghu monk's deep eyes flashed with intelligence. The power on the staff in his hand gradually retracted. The world became calm again. Some snowflakes of dust fell to the ground, but the mountains of dust formed by the thousands of swords still stood. These mountains were like dreamy shadows, like a mirage. However, they strangely emitted a bloody stench. This smell came from those sword slaves and their masters. When a person who was already close to the peak of power began to use his entire life to take revenge for one thing, this person's will had already surpassed his cultivation base. The place where these famed swords came from, those sword slaves who originally could have become famous masters of this world, but who used their own vital energy and their past lives to nourish these famed swords, had all died. The skin of their master, Yi Shao, was already blooming like a scorched tortoise shell. His qi and blood were almost drained, and the light in his eyes was gradually dimming. He was not far away from death. This sword formation did not just surpass his limits. It was a power of a completely different level. When it was completely formed, this sword formation had nothing to do with him. If this sword formation was compared to a towering tree, then he was just the nutrients that this towering tree absorbed during its growth. Theoretically, he was out of energy now and should have died like the sword slaves. But with his astounding resolve, he was still alive and looked at the sword formation from a distance. He had to live. He had to make sure people could enter this sword formation. and then he had to make sure he could see the death of the 9-death silkworm heir. For him, even if that young person was not Wang Jingming reborn, he was now the most important pillar of the Bazin Kendo ground. If he killed that young person, the Bazin Kendo ground would die in the end. The Donghu monk looked silently at the nearest dust mountains, and then slowly reached out with the staff in his hand. A ray of light shot out from the staff and entered the dust mountain. The dust mountain shook unsteadily, but the terrifying power contained in his radiance followed an unknown passage, spreading to an unknown place in the world. I cannot defeat this sword formation. The Donghu monk turned to look at Ding Ning and said seriously, while we can walk through these dust mountains block my perception of the outside world. It even blocks the energy of realmates from entering. Everything we see inside is based on the laws of this sword formation. We will get lost inside. Ding Ning nodded. He glanced at the unconscious Fu Su and confirmed his wounds had not worsened. At the same time, he said, this should be a sword formation that can trap realmates. We can enter but not leave. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at Ding Ning and asked. In her perception, these 1,000 dust mountains weren't just mountains, but rather an unknown world that was constantly changing. If we cannot enter or leave, then there is no meaning in Yi Xiao paying such a price. Ding Ning could not see Yi Zhao's situation right now, but he could imagine what kind of price the other would pay. He frowned deeply and said, this sword formation is most likely like a well, and we are the frogs at the bottom of the well. We know where the outside world is, but we cannot go out and cannot use the clear sky to distinguish north from south. This comparison was not especially appropriate because Zhang Sun Qianxue knew that even the frogs at the bottom of the well could know where the sunrise and sunset were through the changes in light. But she knew what Ding Ning meant. Can you defeat this sword formation? She took a deep breath and looked at Ding Ning. To trap realmates, one needs realmates' power. The formation itself is a method to increase a cultivator's power. Yi Xiao has not reached realmates, but the formation formed by these swords is enough to trap realmates. Ding Ning shook his head. While I am infinitely close to realmates and have sensed some of the mysteries of realmates ahead of time, I have not truly reached realmates. So I cannot defeat the laws of this formation. So we can only wait for people to come and jump into this well. Since he created such a magic array, the power of this magic array naturally can't disappear so quickly. Zhang Sun Qianxue put down the 9 King sword in her hand and allowed the pure and transparent long sword to stab into the ground in front of her. At this time, the dust mountains seemed to be frozen. There was no wind or snow in the world, and everything was calm. But she knew that there would soon be a storm of blood. Sword essence and life bond energy are the purest and most condensed things in the world. Yi Xiao borrowed these 1,000 swords to use the power of the swords themselves, and to use the almost eternal sword essence and life bond energy left in the masters of these swords to maintain the existence of this formation for a long time. Ding Ning chose a spot to sit down, and then said, but we will not be the only ones with a headache. The people outside who want to deal with us will also have a headache on what method to use to deal with the realmates. He glanced at the Donghu monk and sighed. You reaching realmates at this time is a surprise for those people, but they must face it. The Donghu monk respectfully sat cross-legged below him like a devout disciple listening to a teacher. In the past, I thought you had not seen the secrets of realmates, but hearing your words today, I know this is not the case. But I do not understand. Why did you stay at the peak of Realm 7 and not reach Realm 8? This is a kind of choice. Ding Ning looked at him and said calmly, pure power will cause cultivators to lose the sharpness of the weak to win against the strong, or to fight with vital energy of the same level. It will cause many battles to become too simple, and people will form simple habits. They will not carefully comprehend the essence of some sword essences. The path of cultivation is to forge ahead and sense the details. If you lose this sharpness, everything will become simple and casual, and you will naturally become lazy and affect your future cultivation. Other than this, there was no one else in front of me. No teacher told me how to go from Realm 7 to Realm 8. After a pause, Ding Ning said with slight self-mockery, I always thought that if you were first in the world in Realm 7, and no one was a match for you, you would not be in a hurry to reach Realm 8, and would walk more carefully. No one would feel that they had not made any mistakes in their previous cultivation. If they walked more carefully at some crucial stages and walked better, their future cultivation would be stronger. Simply speaking, cultivation is like building a wall. My thoughts at that time were just to make the base of the wall more stable. I wanted to do my best to make up for some of the places where I had not cultivated in the past. The Donghu monk suddenly understood, and other than Ding Ning's words, he sensed more meaning. He said sincerely, because back then you thought that your opponent was yourself. You thought that Realm 7 was the foundation, and Realm 8 was the beginning. You wanted to challenge Realm 9, which was only a legend in the world of cultivators, but almost no one had reached. Ding Ning slowly nodded. After a long moment of silence, he said, just like you said before, it is fine if you do not know, but if you know that there is an unusually beautiful scenery ahead, if you cannot see it, you will feel regret. The Donghu monk was silent for a moment. He suddenly thought of something, and some shock and admiration appeared in his eyes. You said that a cultivator would always make some mistakes in their cultivation. For example, if they chose the wrong method in Realm 2 and 3, or if their cultivation methods were wrong, they would leave behind hidden injuries in their body, or they would not be able to change in the future. But if a cultivator has enough time to start over and cultivate again, then they will know where they went wrong and will not make the same mistake again and correct it. You are using the 9-death silkworm to have such a chance. Ding Ning did not deny it. He looked up at the black sky and said, if there is enough time, I will have a chance to come into contact with the legendary Realm 9. Chapter 6:21. The Donghu monk could only sigh in admiration. He knew that Ding Ning would become the greatest existence in the cultivation world, but the prerequisite was that he had to survive the siege of the mountains. Actually, it is good to end this. Yantai Guanjian, who had been silent for a long time, listened to the conversation between the Donghu monk and Ding Ning. He did not dare to interrupt. At this time, he did not ask Ding Ning any questions, and sat like a junior to Ding Ning. He said, at least we can know who is the enemy and who is the true friend. Do not care too much about the life and death of others. Looking at Ding Ning, who had started to fall silent, Yantai Guanjian said seriously, regardless of life and death, it is due to fate. But in the end, it is due to one's own choice. Sometimes the most frightening thing is to not even have a choice. After a pause, Yantai Guanjian looked at Ding Ning and added, barely living may not be happier than dying. Ding Ning forced a smile. He understood Yantai Guanjian's meaning, but he could not relax. Many years ago, when he stepped into Chongling, he wanted to become the center of the world. The world would rise because of him, and all major events would occur around him. Maybe he would feel inexplicably excited and proud. But after experiencing so much life and death, and carrying such a heavy burden, his thoughts would naturally change. Ding Ning did not feel any hatred towards Yi Xiao, who had caused this siege. Even if some things were just accidents and had good intentions, war and change had caused many people's misfortune. You have taught many people to use the sword. Back then, Chongling used the word perfect to describe your sword. Yantai Guanjian looked at Ding Ning, whose smile was fading. He hesitated slightly, and then said seriously, "Maybe you can make me stronger." Everyone present knew what he meant. In such a difficult situation, if there was a way to increase his power in a short time, everyone's chances of survival would be greater. A person's vital energy cultivation and perception of the primal energies of the universe could not be increased in a short time unless they were at the juncture of a breakthrough like the Donghu monk. The only thing that could rapidly increase a person's battle strength was the comprehension of sword scriptures and sword essence. If he could unleash the power of the sword move to the greatest extent, then this person's combat strength would very likely increase greatly in a short period of time. This was impossible for others, but it happened to be possible for Ding Ning to do it. What Tantai Guanjian said was a publicly acknowledged fact in the world of cultivators. Back then, that person had never publicly accepted a disciple, but at many stages of his cultivation, he had taught several people in the sword. Those people all became famous grandmasters in the world in the future, and the most familiar was Bureau Chief Yi Sealing. Hearing Tantai Guanjian's words, Ding Ning shook his head. In reality, there is no perfect sword essence because no one or anything can be truly and absolutely perfect. Flaws will always exist, but when you reach the pinnacle in certain aspects, these flaws will naturally be covered up. Yantai Guanjian could hear that Ding Ning was speaking from the bottom of his heart, but he could not understand and frowned. Sword essence is important. The essence comes from one's heart, so the key is to believe. Ding Ning looked at his slightly bewildered eyes and said softly, "In the records of cultivators, there is a story. There was an old woman who recited an energy refinement method like it was a scripture. She was not very literate and even misread many words. She did not understand many of the meanings, but she continued to recite for decades and naturally formed vital energy. One day, a cultivator passed by. Seeing her misreading, he could not bear to see her misreading and patiently explained, correcting many of her mistakes. He thought that the old woman would be more skilled, but in the end, the old woman's skills retreated. After a pause for a few breaths, Ding Ning looked at Tantai Guanjian, whose eyes lit up, and said, "There are many versions of this story, but the meaning expressed is the same. Your sword essence is extremely fast and is actually very perfect. What you lack is the last bit of confidence. You do not need my guidance. You just need a person like me to give you affirmation, to make you believe in yourself more, and to dispel the last bit of doubt in your heart. This is the pinnacle. As long as you believe in the deepest part of your heart that this is the pinnacle, your sword will be faster." Ding Ning smiled faintly. He looked at Tantai Guanjian, whose eyes changed again, and said, "If this is guidance, is this guidance?" Tantai Guanjian's mind rippled violently. The air around him rippled, but in the next moment, his expression became absolutely calm. Then he stood and bowed seriously to Ding Ning, who was still sitting. He said softly, "This is the most useful guidance." The Donghu monk put his hands together and sighed. At this time, the sky was slightly white. The white was not because it was close to dawn, but the light created by some powerful energy disturbance. Other than the unconscious Fu Su, Ding Ning, and the others all looked up. This meant that someone had arrived. Someone who could create such a scene, and come at this time, was naturally a Realm 7 Grandmaster. Was it strong reinforcements, or the start of a new battle? Ding Ning took a deep breath and waited calmly. Tantai Guanjian's eyes gradually grew calm and was as humble as usual. But in the view of the Donghu monk, he had a completely different presence than before. The white light grew brighter. When it formed a white cloud that seemed to have absorbed much of the night light, a figure appeared in the cracks of the mountains above their heads. This was a middle-aged man dressed in blue robes. He did not have a sword on him, but his skin was like the moon, giving off a clear and bright light. This middle-aged man's features were very gentle. What was most eye-catching was that there was a silver light between his brows, like a silver vertical eye. This middle-aged man floated down. He examined Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qianxue. His eyes grew more respectful, and he seemed to be more excited. He seemed to be about to bow before he landed, but at this time, Ding Ning's eyebrows rose slightly. There was a muffled sound from the ground in front of him, and then there was a string of sounds of branches snapping, like something connected was snapping. The ground suddenly rose up, like something enormous was trying to burrow out of the ground. The Donghu monk was slightly surprised. Tantai Guanjian's eyebrows rose slightly. Only now did he sense a cold presence that made him feel extremely displeased. The middle-aged man who had not landed had not expected such a change, and his expression froze slightly. Chapter 622. Both the middle-aged man dressed in blue robes in the sky and the strange and cold power coming from the ground clearly came for Ding Ning. But at this time, neither side showed killing intent towards Ding Ning. The most direct killing intent came from the ground. As the ground rose, the killing intent was directed at the middle-aged man dressed in blue robes who was about to land. This middle-aged man dressed in blue robes was not weak. He immediately sensed it and naturally had killing intent. The two killing intents clashed in the air as if they were real, but Ding Ning and the others seemed to be uninvolved and had nothing to do with it. There was a loud explosion, the rising ground in front of Ding Ning, and the others finally split open. Accompanied by gusts of dark wind, the ground dozens of feet wide flipped upwards like leaves in water. In the cracks of the earth, different gravestones appeared and rose up. More and more of these gravestones appeared, giving people the feeling they were endless and would form an enormous mountain made of gravestones. Yantai Guanjian had not known the identities of the two sides. He had maintained his wariness but had not interfered. But the moment he saw these gravestones appear, his mind shifted, and he immediately understood who these gravestones represented. A silver longsword had already appeared in the blue-robed, middle-aged man's hand. The runes on the silver longsword looked like a moon palace. The yuan qi that flowed between the runes looked like real white clouds. The moment he saw these gravestones, his face turned even paler than the white clouds. His respectful expression towards Ding Ning and the others suddenly turned to terror. He gave a shrill scream. The silver light at his brow suddenly expanded, like a silver eye was about to open. 6 silver sword lights flashed at the same time on his sides. Then, like a peacock spreading its tail, they spread into thousands of silver feather-like sword pieces. Thousands of sword shards tore through the air with a terrifying sound, forming a massive waterfall of light that smashed into the ground. However, at the same time, the blue-robed middle-aged man's body seemed to violate the laws of nature. He forcefully reversed his fall and instead shot up into the sky at an astonishing speed. He wanted to escape. Originally, he had wanted to disguise himself as someone on Ding Ning's side, but the person underground wanted to kill him. Also, he could not refute the identity of the person underground and make Ding Ning and the others believe him. The ends of the gravestones were shrouded in black smoke and floated into the air above Ding Ning, and the others were all floating gravestones. Then the thousands of silver sword pieces collided with these gravestones. Countless teeth-numbing crackling sounds rang out. These tombstones floated in the air, shaking incessantly. Countless balls of silver fire exploded on their surfaces, as if millions of stars were being extinguished. The middle-aged man dressed in blue robes twisted in the air and created countless shadows. He found that he could not retreat the way he had come and escape this mountain trap that could trap a realmmate. But what relieved him slightly was that the sword he had used with his life bond energy to temporarily block the attack of the person below. Even if he was lost in the mountains, at least he would not be immediately killed by these people. Yet, he overlooked one point. The person underground could not do anything to him, but there was another existence here that was different from all the swordsmen in the world. Yantai Guanjian looked up. He reached out with his sword. It was just like a pure sword-drawing posture, as if nothing had been done, but the blue-robed middle-aged man in the sky was already screaming in shock. His chest and back felt cold. A bloody mist surged out of his chest and back at the same time. The sword light in Yantai Guanjian's hand disappeared. Because it was so fast, no one could see the color of his life bond sword. You killed him. Zhang Sun Qianxue looked at the middle-aged man dressed in blue robes, who was falling like a meteor, and said to Yantai Guanjian, this was a waste of words. The middle-aged man's heart meridians were shattered. Even if he did not immediately die, falling from such a high altitude, his body would likely be torn apart. But Yantai Guanjian understood her meaning. When he had attacked those grandmasters before, he had only pierced their energy seas, causing them to lose their ability to fight, and left them alive. Peacock Plume, this is someone from the Dugu Marquisate establishment. Yantai Guanjian glanced at her and explained, but he disguised himself as someone from the Flowing Cloud sect. The sect master of the Flowing Cloud sect, Chun Guanha, and Lin Zhujiu were old friends. He also died in the Battle of Chongling for the Bazin Kendo ground. Not killing was the strong's pity for the weak. Killing was because this person's conduct was too despicable. If this unknown blue-robed man had come to assassinate Ding Ning as an enemy, Yantai Guanjian might have spared his life. But he wanted to use the method of gaining trust to find a chance to kill Ding Ning. This was something he could not tolerate. Zhang Sun Qianxue nodded. Only the most important people of the Dugu Marquisate establishment qualify to cultivate the peacock plume. So the Dugu Marquisate establishment has chosen to become our enemy? Ding Ning did not respond. Most of these Marquisate establishments had made their choice 3 years before Yuan Wu ascended the throne. After more than a decade, they would not change their past choices. This was foreseeable, but he could not help but think of Dugu Bai in the Min Mountain Sword trials. He wondered what that young person would do if he learned of his true identity. The gravestones floating above his head silently disappeared, and threads of black energy retreated towards the ground. His gaze naturally followed the shrinking of the black gas and landed on a young man who had just appeared and seemed to be formed by the shrinking of the black gas. This youth was not tall. Even more importantly, he did not have any vitality. One could not feel any flow of blood. He was like a cold corpse, but no corpse had a presence as strong as his. You are Yen Ying's disciple. Ding Ning looked at this youth and said. The youth bowed his head slightly, seeming to be embarrassed, but he still nodded and said, yes. Then the youth seemed to be tired and did not say another word. He sat down next to Ding Ning, hugging his knees and burying his head in his hands. Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qianxue exchanged a look. Then he could not help but ask curiously, you are not asking who I am? The youth answered softly, in any case, you are someone Yuan Wu wants to kill at all costs. I do not care who you are, as long as you can kill Yuan Wu in the future. Everyone could hear the emotions in the words of this thin and weak youth. He had a master he respected the most. But his master was dead, killed by Yuan Wu at the Deer Mountain Conference. He wanted Yuan Wu to die. It was so simple. Chapter 6:23. Of course I want you to come. Ding Ning examined this strange youth and said, also, while I do not know how you know that person is our enemy, without you, maybe it would have taken some effort. But you have never seen me. How can you have confidence in me? You should know that this is a formation that allows entry but not exit. Do you have a way to defeat it? I do not have a way. This youth clearly did not know how to speak, and he had a unique local accent. He seemed to have difficulty even listening to Ding Ning's words, so he spoke slowly. I have confidence in Yuan Wu, but I do not have confidence in myself. Ding Ning stilled. Even he couldn't understand the youth's 2 sentences. What do you mean? Zhang Sun Qianxue frowned and asked directly. I have never seen someone stronger than my master, but Yuan Wu killed my master, so he is stronger than my master. Since he has come here in person and will kill you at all costs, you are the most threatening person to him. The youth's head was still on his knees. At this time, his back appeared indescribably sorrowful. Also, I know that I cannot surpass my master. In the future, I cannot kill Yuan Wu with my own power. Yantai Guanjian stilled. He felt that the first half of the youth's words were very reasonable. This meant that this youth was extremely smart. Also, he had been able to cross the mountains to come here. In terms of courage and mental state, ordinary people could not compare to him. So he could not help but frown and say, How do you know that you cannot surpass your master in the future? You should be the youngest Realm 7 in the world. More accurately, you may be the youngest Realm 7 in the history of the cultivation world. Also, your sect is extraordinary, and your master is one of the strongest people in the world. Now that you are so young, there should not be many Realm 7s that are a match for you. Hearing such sincere, comforting words, the black-robed youth buried his head deeper and said slowly, You do not know, the reason I was able to reach Realm 7 so quickly is because from a certain point of view, I am Master's life bond item. Yantai Guanjian stilled. Zhang Sun Qianxue also didn't expect such a reply and couldn't help but be stunned. Ding Ning muttered to himself as he lowered his head in thought. He more or less figured out the reason for this. Some of the strongest sects in the Qi dynasty cultivated the ghostly path, which was completely different from the other dynasties in the world. Yan Ying had formed his own sect and cultivated in the Thousand Tombs Mountain. From the previous rumors and the black-robed youth's attack, the cultivators of the other dynasties all thought that the top grandmaster of the Qi dynasty, Yan Ying, had forged the Thousand Tombs Mountain, which had the densest yin energy, into his life bond item. After his death, the Thousand Tombs Mountain was naturally passed down to his disciple, the black-robed young man before him. This black-robed youth had moved this mountain into the imperial palace during the chaos of the Qi dynasty to fight the enemy. In the view of outsiders, it was like Yanning had passed his life bond item with his astounding life bond energy to his disciple. His disciple relied on some mysterious method of their sect to perfectly control Yan Ying's life bond item. But the true reason was that Yan Ying had given large amounts of his life bond energy to his disciple during his cultivation. In the many years of cultivation in the Thousand Tombs Mountain, Yan Ying had raised his disciple, and not the Thousand Tombs Mountain. I heard that the Qi Emperor sent your master's body back to the Thousand Tombs Mountain. Ding Ning looked up at the black-robed youth and said, Our sect has a unique secret art. I use my master's power to reach Realm 7. The black-robed youth nodded, feeling very uncomfortable. But cultivation is a gradual process. It's like I've directly reached Realm 7. I haven't walked the path of the previous few realms. So how can I walk the path of the future Realm 8? If I cannot even reach Realm 8, no matter how long I walk on the path of Realm 7, I cannot defeat Yuan Wu. I have no choice. I am not more talented than my master. If I do not choose like this, I fear that even if I slowly cultivate until Yuan Wu dies of old age, I will not be able to catch up to him. The black-robed youth said slowly. I can only rely on others to kill Yuan Wu. Everyone fell silent. Ding Ning saw the shoulders of the black-robed youth tremble slightly. He knew that while there was no sound of crying, this black-robed youth was crying loudly. While this black-robed youth was a grandmaster revered by all the cultivators in the world, he was too young. In terms of age, he was just a child. The Thousand Tombs Mountain only had him and his disciple. After Yenning died, this black-robed youth was alone. If I can leave this formation alive, I can escape. I will help you kill Yuan Wu. I can kill Yuan Wu. Ding Ning was silent for several breaths before he said this. These words might sound like he was trying to trick a child to work for him, but hearing his words, the black-robed youth turned his head and wiped his tears on his knees. Such immature and childish movements made it impossible for people to associate him with the youngest grandmaster. Then the black-robed youth looked up at Ding Ning and said, "It seems that you are really different from other cultivators. I think that you really are like Yuan Wu said, the rebirth of that person back then. But there seems to be another terrifying thing in your body other than the 9 deaths silkworm. What is that? You clearly have an extremely powerful life bond sword. Is that another life bond item? Your master's cultivation method is extraordinary as expected." Ding Ning smiled softly and explained seriously, "That is not a life bond item. It is the elixir of immortality from the Mountain of Ancestors." "Very strange. It is very similar to our energy," the black-robed youth said instinctively after a moment. Ding Ning had originally thought that he would continue to ask what the elixir of immortality was out of curiosity. Hearing the black-robed youth's words, he stilled. But it seems completely different. It seems to be the product of some kind of transformation. The black-robed youth's eyes flashed violently as he tried to sense. Ding Ning frowned slightly. He pondered the meaning in the youth's words and was silent. These swords are the remnants of the life bond energies of the previous cultivators, and then twisted by the life bond energies of the following cultivators. One sword is nothing, but when gathered together, it is very powerful. At this time, the black-robed youth seemed to fear Ding Ning's disdain, and said, "I may not be able to reach Realm 8, but the methods of our 1,000 Grave Mountain can be used like this. In the future, I may be able to create an army." The last part of the words was difficult to understand, but the black-robed youth did not give everyone time to think. His gaze landed on the ground to the side. Large chunks of earth were flipped over. Many of the large chunks of earth raised by the black-robed youth's power stood like tombs. His gaze landed on a piece of earth. There was a bloody corpse. It was the Realm 7 Grandmaster that Yantai Guanjian had killed. A black energy suddenly appeared in the air. It seemed like a black tombstone had sunk down and landed on the corpse of the Realm 7 Grandmaster. A heart-palpitating scene appeared. Slowly, the Grandmaster sat up stiffly. "I cannot have all of my original power, but with my life bond energy, there is at least a portion," the black-robed youth said as he turned to look at the shocked Ding Ning and the others. In the Yu Dynasty, there was a ghost Taoist who said he could control corpses to fight. Your 1,000 Grave Mountains methods are similar. Ding Ning calmed down and then asked the black-robed youth, "What is your name?" The black-robed youth thought. His master had not given him a name in his memory. He thought and said, "Qianmu." Chapter 6:24. In the scriptures of the Donghu monks, the Buddha subdued the great demon, and the demon king turned white bones into soldiers and could not be killed. The Donghu monk had been sensing the dead Grand Master sitting stiffly on the ground. At this time, he sensed clearly and could not help but look at Ding Ning and the black-robed youth. He said, "Previously, I thought it was just an illusion, and it was an exaggeration. But now, it seems that this 1,000 Grave Mountains methods are true. If given enough time, he can even create an army." In this way, I was too narrow-minded. In the past, I was too ignorant. Ding Ming nodded and said, "In the cultivation records of Chongling, there are methods to turn beans into soldiers. For most cultivators, this is a myth without any basis. But in some of the ancient records, it is mentioned that this method uses a kind of bean from overseas. I think that those beans are special and can hold the life bond energy of some cultivators. Unless you see it with your own eyes, how can you believe it?" The more Yantai Guanjin thought, the more incredulous he felt, and even felt cold inside. This ghostly cultivation method was too strange. Back then, Yanning had shocked everyone at the Deer Mountain Conference. Then he had made his disciple a Realm 7 Grandmaster in one step and perfectly held his life bond energy. This was a heaven-defying method. While this Qian Mu's cultivation was limited to Realm 7 for his entire life, and he could not come into contact with more cultivation worlds, this method seemed to be the most suitable for him. Because for other cultivators, life bond energy could not be wasted. Continuously accumulating life bond energy in the body and focusing on nurturing a life bond item was the process of accumulation and comprehension from Realm 7 to Realm 8. But for Qian Mu, continuously accumulating life bond energy was useless. It could not cause a qualitative change. The life bond energy produced in daily cultivation could be injected into external items. In other words, the bodies of grandmasters and other cultivators could be refined into items that could be controlled. When it came to cultivators of Yantai Guanjin's level, they would not feel that such methods were unorthodox. That zombie-like grandmaster was just a weapon in his eyes. But this method was too astounding. Even if this Qian Mu's life bond energy was not endless, as long as he was not killed, the life bond energy he obtained after a period of cultivation could create a weapon like this. Just like the Donghu monk said, slowly accumulating, he could really create an army. These things were called Yin gods and ghosts in the world of cultivators. When facing an enemy, they could not be like real living beings. At most, they could only accept the direction of his killing intent. They were more wooden when facing an enemy. But even if they only had Realm 4 or 5 strength, they were extremely terrifying in numbers. What was even more frightening was that these Yin spirits and ghosts did not feel fear or pain. They could probably still fight even if they were severely injured. If we can leave alive, I fear that with just the two of you helping him, he will be able to fight for the world with Yuanwu. Yantai Guanjin looked at this black-robed youth who called himself Qian Mu and looked like a boy next door, and could not help but say, Ding Ming smiled, but the emotions in his eyes were very complicated, because this assumption was built on the premise that they could leave alive. Even more importantly, his friends had always been very strong. In the era of the Bazin Kendo ground, in the view of anyone, just 2 or 3 people standing with him were enough to conquer the world. However, the enemy was also very powerful. The enemy also had many unexpected methods. Just like now, the shadows of the thousands of mountains outside him overlapped in his eyes, forming layers of haze. What he had experienced told him the final victory was not determined by who had terrifying weapons, but who had more terrifying weapons. Zheng Xiu learned many things from us. There are some things we must learn from her. Never expose all of our moves to the enemy. Ding Ning turned to look at Yantai Guanjin and said, if we can leave alive, it is best to not let Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu know of such moves. Yantai Guanjin nodded. Before he nodded, a wave of cold energy came out of Qian Mu's body. That grandmaster, who had been sitting stiffly, fell back, his body quickly festering into black water that seeped into the ground. No one had any objections. If an army like this had destructive power in the future, then before such an army could form, it was best not to let people like Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu know. The thousands of dust mountains stubbornly stood. There were many mottled shadows in the seemingly still dust mountains. These mottled shadows cast down strange shadows that sometimes floated on their bodies. The sky gradually brightened, and the night passed. The night was always connected to death and made people feel unsafe. But in reality, it only affected people's emotions. Waiting for the unknown made people feel the most helpless and impatient. When the first ray of sunlight fell from the sky, but even Ding Ning and the others in the dust mountains could not determine where this ray of sunlight came from. Fu Su woke up. In the morning sunlight, he saw Yantai Guanjin's cold and humble profile. Why is it like this? He felt inexplicable pain, not because of his physical wounds, but from the heart. He could not help but look at Yantai Guanjin and speak. Whatever you do, you have to follow your truest feelings. Yantai Guanjin understood his meaning and said seriously, "This is the first truth Master told me when I truly entered Min Mountain Sword Sect and received his inheritance." Then he looked up and added, "The existence of any sect is not in the form of a sect, but in the principles they persist in. So they can even risk the entire Qin dynasty and Min Mountain Sword Sect falling, and pay such a price." Fu Su looked at Yantai Guanjin's face in the sunlight. His voice sounded inside, but he could not speak. "No one says the sect has to work for the dynasty. All kinds of cultivators gather in the cultivation places, and they all have different pursuits." Yantai Guanjin knew what he was thinking and said slowly, "But you have been in such a position since childhood, so you have always been influenced by others. You think all of this is natural. Then what about you? You always listen to your parents, but have you ever considered your truest feelings?" Fu Su could not speak. He did not know how to answer this question. His heart did not know how to answer. "It is starting." At this time, Ding Ning's voice suddenly sounded. Yantai Guanjin suddenly looked up. Zhang Sun Qianxue and the Donghu monk, who had been recuperating all this time, opened their eyes and looked up. Qian Mu shrunk back naturally. His black robes rippled like a pool of stagnant water and covered his entire body, because at this time, in the sky, there was the presence he feared the most. It was just morning, but in the span of a few breaths, the sky grew brighter. The rays of sunlight seemed to form into beams, many times brighter than the sun at noon. In a sky like this, even higher up, countless pale, white lines of fire floated down. The pale, white lines of fire and the bright sunlight quickly merged together and intersected in the air. "So this is how it is." Yantai Guanjin's expression grew grave. This was the combination of star fire and sun fire, two kinds of primal energies of the universe of completely different natures were forcibly merged together by two powerful energies. Only Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu in the world could do this. After the silence for half a night, when the killing intent rose again, no one had expected it to be Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu working together. Chapter 6:25. It was impossible for the moon, stars, and sun to appear at the same time. The cold and blazing energies were like fire and water that could not mix. But at dawn, they continuously gathered, merged, and evolved in the sky. This was definitely a grand scene that had never been recorded in the records of cultivators. It was filled with great danger. But when they saw the pale, white flowing flames and the golden red sun true fire intersecting in the air like colors on a palette and turning into flames of different shapes, all the cultivators who saw it felt breathtaking and beautiful. Yuan Wu has not returned to Chongling. Ding Ning narrowed his eyes and looked at the flames in the sky that were constantly changing shapes. He looked at the flames that seemed to be very heavy and should have fallen down long ago, twisting and spinning in the air and tearing at the profound primal energies of the universe from all directions. He said in a slightly cold voice, "Zheng Xiu has given a response." When Ding Ning's voice sounded, there were many enormous roars and sonic booms in the distant forest. Even from a great distance, one could still sense countless heavy and massive bodies flying through the air, gliding through the air, like the giant boats of god-kings. Those were soaring snakes, true serpents. Or, other than the soaring snakes they had sensed before, there were other beasts. At this time, Fu Su looked at the profound light in the sky. He could not understand the meaning of Ding Ning's words, but other than him, everyone present understood. Before Yuan Wu ascended the throne, in the battle when Wang Jingming fought his way into Changling, Zhang Xiu and Yuan Wu had not worked together like this. So this was one of the two's greatest secrets. But now they had used such a move. This could only mean that Zhang Xiu and Yuan Wu had reached an agreement on this matter. Kill Ding Ning at all costs, including sacrificing Fu Su, so the cold starfire and the blazing sunfire could merge perfectly. Those waiting on the plains, including the cultivators of Jiaodong Commandery, understood her intentions. So those soaring snakes and beasts would fly into the air now. Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu's killing plan at all costs had started. Tantai Guanjin bowed his head slightly. He could not help but turn to look at Fu Su. His gaze was unconsciously filled with sympathy and pity. In reality, other than a few people in the imperial palace, most cultivators like him in Changling liked Fu Su. Because Fu Su did not have the presence of the Changling imperial family in Jiaodong Commandery, he was really kind. Fu Su originally did not understand, but when he heard the distant yet clear sounds and noticed Yantai Guanjin's gaze, he suddenly understood. His face grew paler, and his lips trembled. Yuan Wu should have someone by his side, someone he absolutely trusts. Ding Ning looked at Zhang Sun Qianxue and Qian Mu, who wanted to kill Yuan Wu the most. He said slowly, "Yuan Wu is a very cautious person. He used this method to consume his power in exchange for Zheng Xiu's response. I'm afraid he won't have the ability to protect himself for a long time. Then, he must have someone by his side who is strong enough and trustworthy enough to protect him. At the very least, that person is on the same side as him. If we want to kill Yuan Wu, we must first find this person." Qian Mu nodded. Most of the time, he was very quiet and looked very young. But every time Yuan Wu was mentioned, he would become very serious and murderous. There were countless Qin and Chu grandmasters on this battlefield. Also, when Yuan Wu and the 9-Death Silkworm appeared in this world at the same time, they would attract many powerful grandmasters from other dynasties. The person who could ensure Yuan Wu's safety was at least close to the Donghu monk before his breakthrough, and was much stronger than the other Realm 7 grandmasters in the world. A person like this was a true threat even to Realm 8s. An expert like this hidden by Yuan Wu's side was Yuan Wu's strongest shield, and also a poisonous snake in the darkness. At a crucial moment, they could bite them. Who else could it be? Zhang Sun Qianxue took a deep breath. She searched through the people of the past in her mind, but could not think of anyone so strong as to protect Yuan Wu at the same time. When she could not help but say this, everyone started to fall silent. The starfire and sunfire in the sky were still falling, but they did not sweep in the primal energies of the universe in all directions. The pale white sparks and the bunches of true sun fire eventually condensed into a strange light purple color, turning into many irregular blades. The edges of the blades were as long as swords, shining with green and gold light. These blades were fixed in shape, like they were frozen in the air. If the sword essence that Ding Ning had shown in the previous battle was perfect, then the feeling that these blades in the air gave everyone was wild and did not belong to this world. The Donghu monk's face gradually turned red, and then a deep red like glass. In this moment where time seemed to freeze, the energy and blood in his body flowed faster and faster, and gradually boiled. At this time, the staff in his hand reached up. Because he gripped it too hard, his qi, blood, and vital essence flowed too quickly, and the extremely tough skin in his palm actually tore. Streams of blood flowed along the staff like sticky red paint, spreading to the tip of the staff. Multiple blood flowers bloomed at the tip of the staff, glowing like gemstones. The power that came out of each petal turned into an invisible and transparent canopy that overlapped over their heads. In the sky that was 100 times brighter than usual at noon, thousands of sword lights suddenly lit up. Those light purple swords, whose edges flashed with green and golden light, turned into rapidly flowing sword lights that filled the air and rained down on them like a torrential downpour. The wild and domineering sword lights formed a river, pressing and cutting every tiny bit of primal energies of the universe here, and squeezing out thousands of tiny bolts of lightning in this space. The terrifying impact of the power did not produce any violent sounds. When these sword lights hit the invisible canopy above their heads, the sound they made was as soft as raindrops falling on mossy rocks. Everyone around the old monk, including Ding Ning, had admiration in their eyes. This dust mountain blocked the connection between the old monk and realm-made energy, but most of the power contained in the combined sword lights of Zhengxiu, and Yuanwu was neutralized by him with a soft power. Like the softness of the moss and the gaps between the moss, they softly destroyed the power falling from the sky. This was an indescribable move, but everyone knew this was not enough. In the transparent sky, there did not seem to be any changes, but the blood flowers at the tip of the staff in the old monk's hand were covered in cracks. The cracks even extended to the staff in his hand and his body. Next to the old monk, there was a ball of black smoke. In the thick black smoke, Qianmu looked up. The burning true fire of the sun countered the vital energy of the method he cultivated the most. So he was naturally afraid. So when he looked up now, he appeared especially stubborn. In the world of his perception, countless black dots appeared and rapidly enlarged. Gravestones burrowed out of the ground and flew up. Chapter 626. These gravestones, including the Black Mountain, were Yen Ying's life bond items. At this time, when countless gravestones appeared in his perception, and then a black mountain appeared, his life bond energy surged out of his energy sea along his meridians. A real black mountain, combined with the underground wasteland, stood tall and upright. With a loud bang, the black mountain peak crashed into the raging sword river. The silent starfire and the blazing true fire of the sun could both damage his life bond energy. In this moment, the black mountain gave off the sound of hot oil being melted. Many damaged tombstones quickly had holes appear as though they were being corroded and expanded as though they were being melted. This was a true kind of pain. This black-robed youth immediately screamed. But the scream was not filled with terror, but anger. He screamed angrily and waved his hands. The tombstones followed his will and stubbornly slammed upwards, smashing towards the sword light. In the Yin Mountain, there was a simple grass hut. Yuanwu, dressed in ordinary cloth robes, sat in the open space in front of the grass hut. This open space was between a raised cliff, and in front of him was a cloud sea. The cloud sea of other mountains was usually dignified and beautiful, but the reason the Yin Mountain was called the Yin Mountain was because the mountain was high and cold. Between the dancing clouds, there was blackness. At this time, there were thousands of dark dust mountains and black Yin energy burning and bursting out of the mountains. So the layers of mist in front of him were the color of lead. His expression was calm, but the meridians in his skin were twisting like earthworms. Some of his skin lines gave off glowing light, and even felt like they would crack at any moment. While he was not in the dust mountains in reality, he was in the most dangerous battle with another realmmate in the world. As to the black-robed youth, he was another old opponent to him, Yening, who had seriously injured him at the Deer Mountain Conference. There were countless difficult choices in life, compared to the danger of the battle itself. The battle in his mind was even more difficult, but at many times, some choices could not be made according to one's thoughts. Just like right now, he could sense the stability of the star fire more clearly than anyone else. The cold and cold star fire fell down steadily, and gathered with the life bond energy he released without any intention of urging. But this kind of stability and lack of ripples was the most powerful urging. Yuanwu shook his head softly and sighed. The Donghu monk holding the staff raised his eyebrows slightly. He looked down at his body. That wild sword river was still moving violently in the space above, but the purest part of the power forcibly penetrated his energy and stabbed into his body. This kind of power was a kind of pure vibrational force, as if someone was holding the staff in his hand and shaking it with all their might. After a moment of hesitation, the Donghu monk understood that this power came from the other realmmate, Yuanwu. He also understood what kind of means the other party had used to cause real harm to him. This kind of twisting of life bond energy was like Yuanwu was holding his hand, and then Yuanwu was making his body shake furiously and shake along with the monk's body. This was a method that caused both sides to be injured. But there was one point. Yuanwu had reached Realm 8 for a longer time than him, and walked further on the path of Realm 8. So his energy sea and some important meridians were more stable than him. This kind of vibration was targeted at his energy sea. It could not be denied that using such a method, Yuanwu would be seriously injured, and even his cultivation would fall. He would not be able to recover for a long time, but his cultivation would be crippled, and he would die. So Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu's combined attack wanted Yuanwu to be seriously injured, and he to die. At this time, the Donghu monk's mind was exceptionally clear. He knew that this most likely came from Zheng Xiu's intentions. Yuanwu forced her to sacrifice her son as the price, so she naturally wanted Yuanwu to pay an equal price. This was fair for her, and Yuanwu, or rather, the relationship between her and Yuanwu needed to be maintained like this. The Donghu monk had a bitter expression. He was the target of this combined attack. He had just reached Realm 8 and seen the wondrous world, but now his energy sea was about to collapse, and his life was about to end. He naturally felt great unwillingness. But at this time, Qian Mu screamed even more furiously. He sensed where the true killing intent was, and sensed that there was a power that completely ignored his 1,000 graveyard mountain and passed through his gravestones and landed in the Donghu monk's body. As he screamed, hundreds of gravestones shrouded in black energy fell down like meteors, charging into the old monk's energy sea with waves of black energy. These gravestones appeared enormous in the air, but when they hit the old monk's energy sea, they were the size of small seals. The old monk's red face immediately turned black. In his perception, his energy sea, which had chaotic power passing through, was suddenly filled with black stones. These black stones caused the vitality of his organs to show signs of decline, but in this moment, the collision and friction of these black stones alleviated the destructive power to his energy sea. With a pop, he vomited a mouthful of black blood. The old monk seemed to age many years in an instant, and his organs gave off a presence of true aging. But as the waves of black energy charged out of his energy sea was saved in the end. He survived in the end. Above the empty space where Yuanwu was, a heavy rain suddenly fell. Several wrinkles appeared at the corners of Yuan Wu's eyes, but these wrinkles went deep into his flesh and seeped blood. His skin also exuded a lot of resplendent crystal light, like stardust. When the rain began to fall, a cultivator holding a yellow paper umbrella walked behind him, blocking the rain for him. In Chongling, deep in the terrifyingly silent imperial palace, Zhang Xiu stood with her hands at her sides. The scattered sparks fell from the space in front of her, like countless sparkling and translucent gems, passing through her mysterious and indescribable patio, where countless rays of light were refracted. Her hands trembled, and blood dripped from her fingertips. There were countless fine cracks on the skin of her white hands and arms. You are the true, lonely one. Because I will feel heartache, but from the moment you started to fight for the world, you have never felt heartache for anyone. She slowly raised her head and said these two sentences in her heart. She could not see all the scenes of the battle, but she could sense where Yuan Wu's power went in the end. She was certain that even if the Donghu monk did not die, his cultivation was almost crippled. Chapter 627. I am really very disappointed. When Zhang Xiu put away the star fire and walked back into her study, a young person was standing by the pond and looking at the person sitting on the chair under the eaves. With a gurgling sound, the carp in the pond spat out a bubble. The carps in this pond were very fat and big. Moreover, the three colors of red, white, and green were very bright. They were not messy at all. They were a very rare breed. There were also a few that were pure white all over, but there was a red sarcoma on their forehead. The value of these carps was even greater than the simple courtyard itself, and it was not something that could be obtained with money alone. Only power could surpass money in the world. This young person had been called Li Xian before, and now Fong Xian. This courtyard belonged to him. So in the past, he had given people the feeling of a young and energetic cultivator. But now, he stood with his hands behind his back and gave people the feeling of great power. He looked at Fong Xiang, who was sitting on the chair with anger on his face and an aggressive gaze. The weather in Chongling had warmed. These carp that sank to the bottom of the pond in the winter were happily playing in the water. But Fong Xiang on the bamboo chair was still cold and covered in a thick blanket. What are you disappointed about? Hearing Fong Xian's question, Fong Xiang's expression did not change much. He was still the same as usual, as if nothing had happened, and spoke with a trace of laziness. Why pretend? Fong Xian laughed coldly and took out a letter from his sleeve. His voice was slightly chilly as he said, "Since you have already accepted the arrangements, and I have already called you father, why did you still secretly write a secret letter to your distant relative about the matters of the Marquis estate?" Fong Xiang listened to these words and looked at this domineering young person, but did not speak. "Is it not good for you to enjoy the rest of your life here?" Fong Xian looked at Fong Xiang, who was silent, and thought that the other was afraid. He looked at the letter in his hand and said, "Is there anything you are dissatisfied with? What delicacies do you want? Even if it's a beautiful maid, what can't satisfy you?" Fong Xiang looked at him and remained silent. "There's no way I wouldn't know about your little tricks. So please do not do this." Fong Xian exerted a little force and shattered the letter in his hand. The fragments drifted with the wind and fell into the pond beside him. Although the koi fish were beautiful, they were very foolish. They all thought that it was food and instantly swallowed all the scraps. "I think you're mistaken about something." Fong Xian turned around and walked out of the courtyard. But at this moment, Fong Xiang's voice rang out. Fong Xian's heart suddenly shook. He suddenly turned around, looked at Fong Xiang, and said in a low voice, "What is it?" "Fong, Ho Province was conquered by me and my father. Moreover, I have a younger brother. Even if I really recognize you as my son, you won't be able to make decisions in Fangho province." Fang Xiang smiled and said, "Moreover, if you really want to acknowledge me as your father, you have to kneel and pay your respects every time you see me. How can there be such an arrogant son like you in this world?" "You want me to kneel and greet you?" Fang Xian's eyes narrowed slightly as he smiled. Fang Xiang looked at him. He just looked and didn't say anything. "Just based on a cripple like you?" Fang Xian's smile completely disappeared, and his face turned cold. "Even if your father survives this battle, I fear he will never be transferred back to Chongling. And your younger brother? Does he dare to return to Chongling? If he appears, he will be killed before entering the city. So, please wake up." After a pause, Fang Xian looked disdainfully at Fang Xiang and said, "You can only rely on me. Fang Ho province still exists because the Empress needs to give face to those marquises. She needs Fang Ho province to be maintained. If you attempt to do something that makes everyone unhappy, maybe your luxurious life will disappear at any time. The food given to you may be of lower quality than the servants." He was a member of the Li family, one of Prime Minister Li's confidants. Right now, he was in charge of Fang Ho province. His words and actions had the presence of an important person. His threat caused the entire courtyard to sink into winter. "So, there is something you still do not understand." Hearing his threat, Fang Xiang laughed like he was looking at a pitiful worm. "You probably do not understand why. Starting from the Deer Mount Conference, Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu have been targeting the Fang family. The true reason is not that my younger brother left Chongling before the Deer Mountain Conference and angered Yuanwu, or that my cultivation was crippled and I lost my value." Fang Xiang looked at the stunned Fang Xian and said with slight disdain, "The true reason is that Fangho province is too strong. Because even Wang Jingmeng thought highly of my younger brother back then, and thought that he was the cultivator with the last future out of all the cultivators in Chongling. Adding on me and my father, our Fangho province will be much stronger than the other marquisate establishments." Fang Xian unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He didn't have the time to think about the deeper meaning behind this, but for some reason, his heart began to feel a chill. "While you are a member of the Li family and are born with Prime Minister Li's trust, you are too young and stupid." Fang Xiang looked sympathetically at this young person and said slowly, "So you probably will not understand. Yuanwu can tolerate Yi Siling because he needs to balance some of the factions in Chongling, and also because Yi Siling is cultivating overseas. In reality, his cultivation is not rising quickly. Also, he has suffered serious hidden injuries while helping him search for spirit medicines and kill some sea beasts. Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu are different in most areas, but they are similar in one thing. They are jealous of talent, jealous of cultivators who can truly pose a threat to them and even surpass them." The more Fang Xian heard, the more shocked he was. He forced himself to be calm and said, "After saying so much, what does it have to do with now? Yuanwu had my brother go to Deer Mountain to die before his breakthrough, and had me cripple my cultivation at Deer Mountain. Our Fang Ho province has endured all of this." Fang Xiang said emotionally, "Even if you have to use some of the power of our marquisate establishment, even if you have to act like a tyrant in front of me, even if my brother has to hide overseas, I can endure all of this. But to have my father go to the border and die, this is too much. I sent that letter to that distant relative of mine because my brother had been there a few times when he was young, and it was very likely that he would revisit that place. After all, even I do not know where my brother went to cultivate. If I send the letter there, maybe he will know some information." After a pause, Fang Xiang looked at the pale-faced Fang Xian and said, "Actually, there is a simpler way to let him know some information about Fangho province. But in the past, I felt that the sacrifice was too great or unnecessary. Fong Xian could not understand the meaning in Fong Xiang's words. He just felt his body turn cold and started to feel terror. Some people can endure because I am still alive. This Fong Ho province seems to be the same as before. But if I die, many people will not be able to endure. Also, no one will be able to hide something like my death. My brother will know the news. What did you say? Fong Xian cried out in shock. Fong Xiang smiled, a smile filled with disdain. You, Fong Xian, unconsciously took a step back. You probably want to ask me why I feel there is a need now. Very simple. You even intercepted the letter I sent. Also, you probably have not had the time to know what happened on the battlefield at Im Mountain. Fong Xiang took a deep breath and glanced at the merry koi in the pond. He inexplicably felt his mood lighten. The only pity is that if you had only been a little more respectful to me on the surface, even if it was just on the surface, I might have spared your life. But you have always thought of me as a cripple. You do not know that I can kill you at any time. That's because your cultivation is too weak. When his voice rose, all the hair on Fong Xian's body stood on end. With a shrill shout, his body flew out madly. But at this time, hundreds of waves of energy shot out of Fong Xiang's body. These forces were extremely heterogeneous, but they were condensed and powerful, like pieces of shattered sword blades. These waves of energy came from the Deer Mountain Conference. They were the powers that had stabbed into his body when he had fought against the top experts. These powers were like daggers nailed into his body, causing his cultivation to be crippled and unable to be removed, because when he removed them, it was like hundreds of daggers were being pulled out at the same time. His body would suddenly have hundreds of wounds that could not be healed. Fong Xian's body was swept by these waves of energy. With a harsh shout, his body suddenly collapsed into countless pieces that flashed with a disgusting white and bloody light in the sunlight. In the blinding sunlight, Fong Xiang was dizzy, but he was very satisfied. He smiled and closed his eyes. Chapter 628. The Wei River passed through all of Chongling. When Fong Xiang stopped breathing, outside Chongling, on the shore of a tributary of the Wei River, a patch of wildflowers was blooming. These wildflowers were a natural deep purple and looked interesting when they bloomed in the sunlight. It was even possible to see their delicate petals open bit by bit at a discernible speed. The flower was very small, but it had an enchanting fragrance. In the process of blooming, its pollen was constantly emitted. This extremely fine pollen was a sparkling silver under the sunlight, making the blooming flower look like it was plated with specks of silver powder, constantly flickering with a mysterious luster under the sunlight. This was the superior epiphyllum unique to Chongling. It was rare and could not be transplanted. The flowers only bloomed for 15 minutes. A middle-aged man was standing silently in front of this patch of flowers, watching them bloom. Among these flowers that had finally bloomed, he bent down and picked the brightest one. His face was very handsome, especially the bridge of his nose was very high, and his facial features had a clear sense of beauty as if they were carved by a knife. His posture was also very tall and straight. The light golden armor on his body was very slim, making him look even more valiant. His fingers were covered in light gold metal armor. The unique coldness of the metal, the light gold light against the deep purple flowers, made him even more speechless. He had an inexplicable presence. Not far behind him, there was a military camp. In the black camp, all of the soldiers were dressed in pitch-black metal armor. Most of these soldiers stood motionless like metal puppets. Just like the yellow-robed cultivator, not far from him, They were waiting for him. If I wanted to enter Chongling, I would have entered long ago. Why rush now? The cultivator dressed in the unique yellow robes represented Jiaodong Commandery in the Qin dynasty and the mistress of the imperial palace around Chongling. But this middle-aged man, who only picked the most beautiful flower, did not even look at him. He said disdainfully, "I have trained the army of the Qin dynasty for many years. This nether armor army is an army that followed me to war. I trained them myself. I rarely participate in the power struggles of Chongling. Even when my son Li Shixing did something wrong when he was young, I exiled him to the border. But he is my son, and he is trained well at the border. Even I am proud of him." This middle-aged man could only be Marquis Li of the 13 marquises of the Qin dynasty. He paused, turned around, and looked at the yellow-robed cultivator with narrowed eyes. He casually put the flower into his mouth and chewed. Purple liquid dripped from the corner of his lips, leaving behind a purple mark on his white lips. It was more shocking than blood and gave people a strange feeling. "I want to train him, not to kill him, but she set up a trap at the Wuji border. My son is missing. According to the military reports, he is most likely dead. Now, you want me to lead the army and return to Chongling?" Hearing his cold and disdainful voice, the yellow-robed cultivator bowed his head even lower, appearing more respectful. But his response was slow and calm. "The Empress thinks that people like you care most about the records left behind in the history books. She thinks that you are someone who does great things and does not care about trifles. For the sake of the dynasty's achievements, you will not care too much about these things." "Really?" Marquis Li could not help but laugh. "Also, she has already told you that if it is for the dynasty, you have to sacrifice." The yellow-robed cultivator sensed his murderousness. He shrank slightly and quickly said, "She has already made the same sacrifice as you." Marquis Li stilled and then understood. "Fusu?" The yellow-robed cultivator nodded. The murderousness in Marquis Li's eyes slowly faded. But when he turned to look at the black camps, his eyebrows rose slightly. "General Bai's God-killing army has all died." But before he could speak, the yellow-robed cultivator continued, "So your nether armor army is now the strongest army of the Qin dynasty. Also, your nether armor came from the former Yu dynasty and is best used against cultivators. The Empress knows that she has not told you enough, so she had me tell you that after Min Mountain Sword Sect is defeated, you can first pick a sword manual or a sword horde. She also told you that General Bai's God-killing army was destroyed when they went to Donghu to take an ancestral sword of the Spirit Void Sword Sect. That ancestral sword of the Spirit Void Sword Sect should be the strongest sword in the world right now, and has fallen into the hands of the 9-Death Silkworm Heir. If the 9-Death Silkworm Heir is killed in the end, that sword will belong to you. Do you know that there is an old saying in the Wuji border tribes? Marquis Li said coolly, "Meat that has already been eaten is meat. Otherwise, even if the meat is placed in front of you, it is not meat." You do not need to go to Min Mountain Sword Sect. The yellow-robed cultivator seemed to have predicted that he would say this. Or rather, the mistress of Chongling in the imperial palace knew that Marquis Li would say this. He just stated faithfully, "You only need to send troops to surround half of Min Mountain and not let the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect leave. Someone else will go to Min Mountain Sword Sect." Marquis Li's gaze flashed. He said, "Who will go up the mountain? Who will lead troops to surround Min Mountain Sword Sect?" "Marquis Dugu will be with you at the foot of the mountain." The yellow-robed cultivator said respectfully, "As to going up the mountain, I do not know, but I think the Empress will have appropriate arrangements." Marquis Li took a deep breath. His brow furrowed deeply. He had thought of many possibilities, but had not expected the Dugu Marquis establishment to take on such a role. He was silent for a long time, and then asked, "What will the Dugu Marquis establishment gain?" The yellow-robed cultivator did not hesitate and quickly answered softly, "Half Guanzhong, half Guanzhong." These were 3 simple words, but they caused Marquis Li's hands to imperceptibly tremble. Such extravagance! Marquis Li could not help but take a deep breath, and then say, but when he heard his own words in the air, he thought back to every step that Jiaodong commandery woman had taken. They seemed to be extremely shocking, and each step was terrifyingly extravagant. He did not speak, and waved his hand in irritation at the yellow-robed cultivator. Then he walked towards the black camp. On the other side of Chongling, an army was advancing. This army was completely different from the dark and cold army in his sight. They were all dressed in bright clothes and horses. This army that was moving quickly towards Min Mountain Sword sect wore bright red armor. The armor was not made of metal, but a unique kind of leather armor. But the leather armor had unique seal scripts that seemed to have flames and flowers flowing within. There was a carriage in the middle of the army, pulled by a dozen strange beasts. At the center of the chariot sat a general dressed in red armor. His face was sickly pale, and his body was thin. However, there were many swords on his back. These swords were arranged in an orderly manner like a peacock spreading its tail behind him. Chapter 629. In the noon sun, in an alley of Chongling, a door slowly opened outwards. This door was very large and thick, giving people the feeling of a mountain. It was more than twice the size of the doors of half of the residences. The reason was because this was the door of a marquisate establishment in Chongling, and also because the master of this marquisate establishment was exceptionally large. The figure of Mount Hung, Marquisate Su, appeared behind the open door. His body was like a moving mountain of flesh. When he moved, each piece of flesh seemed to vibrate. But no one would find it laughable. One was because his status gave people a dignified presence. 2 was because many cultivators knew that Mount Hung Marquisate Su's obesity was related to the method he cultivated. The amount of vital energy and primal energies of the universe that a cultivator could store came from the energy sea meridians and meridians that could hold them. Any vital energy method had the effect of nurturing, strengthening energy, and changing the body of a cultivator. The deeper one cultivated, the stronger the capacity of the energy sea meridians and meridians. The body could store more vital energy and primal energies of the universe. The more vital energy and primal energies of the universe stored in the body, the longer a cultivator could fight and endure great consumption. They could use some domineering moves more often. The vital energy method that Mount Hung Marquisate Su cultivated was simple and violent. This method was not like the methods of the Donghu monks, which made one's body more condensed and strong, but made one's body larger. The wider the meridians and blood vessels, the more vital energy they could hold. So the size of his body was related to his cultivation. Compared to many years ago, his body was already several times larger. Moreover, as his cultivation grew stronger, his body would continue to grow. Even more importantly, inexplicably when he left today, his body seemed to be much larger than usual. Therefore, this door, which had just been replaced 2 years ago, seemed a little small for his current body. Maybe because he felt it was inconvenient to enter the door, and other than the door, there should be many things to change. So today, the fat man appeared slightly worried. This alley was filled with the residences of the generals who had followed him in the past. Among the 13 marquises of the Qin dynasty, the generals who had followed him could be considered to have enjoyed a good life in the entire Qin dynasty. Most of them became high officials of the warden's office. Some were stationed at the nearby city passes, and their families were in Chongling. He was one of the few marquises of the Qin dynasty who could stay in Chongling for a long time. As a result, this alley was the most vibrant in Chongling. Many of the courtyards had trees that had been moved from the nearby mountains and even from people's homes. Some were even ancient trees that had grown for hundreds of years. When Mount Hung Marquis Su's foot had just stepped over the tall threshold of his courtyard, under the shade of an ancient tree that extended into the courtyard, there was a woman waiting for him. No one noticed when this woman had arrived. It was as if she had appeared the moment Marquis Su appeared. Her figure was small and very asymmetrical compared to Mount Hung Marquis Su, who was like a mountain of flesh. But the two had similar presences. Everyone in this alley knew the identity of this woman. Because she was used to wearing white robes and a white dress, she did not fit in with the black and gray of this city. She was Yi Siling, the bureau chief of the astrology bureau. Marquis Su of Mount Hung stepped out of the courtyard. The sun shone down on his head. His shadow was very straight, but it was still a huge ball. In the shadow, like a small mountain, he saw many ants crawling around in the cracks of the stones on the ground. He could not help but shake his head. His shadow was large, but compared to the giant turrets in the distance, it was too small. So he sighed. In a city like this, both he and Yi Siling were as minuscule as ants. After enduring for so many years in Chongling, you finally express your feelings? As he shook his head and sighed, he spoke to Yi Siling in front of him. You have endured for so many years. Finally, it is time to use this sword. Before Yi Siling could respond, he looked up at Yi Siling and said with a serious and strange expression, "Do you not feel it is too early?" Yi Siling smiled. Her smile was similar to her expression when she saw Zhao Zhan back in Chongling. You feel it is too early. Then, how long did you think I would have endured? At least until the Bazin Kendo ground officially starts to rebel. At that time, you will still be in a high position in Chongling. You should be able to work from the inside and outside to be most effective. Mount Hung Marquis Su did not smile and said seriously, at least in terms of the art of war, no art of war will make people seek death. You are about to completely take down Min Mountain Sword Sect. You have turned the world upside down. Why are you still not moving? Yi Siling looked disdainfully at him and said, However, I admire Zheng Xiu greatly. Either she doesn't do it, or she will do something that will turn the world upside down. She forced out all of the people's intentions at once. This is not attacking the Chu, but attacking the heart. What did you say? Min Mountain. Mount Hung Marquis Su was shocked. The flesh on his body seemed to jump up. Yi Siling sneered and said, Otherwise, why did I send you out? To let you taste the food of those sword schools. Isn't it because I want you to suppress those sword academies and at the same time deal with that young lady from the state of Qin, Ji Qingqing? Mount Hung Marquis Su frowned slightly. His expression was cold, and he was silent. In these years, everyone has been guessing my intentions. I am curious about you. Yi Siling said scornfully. I also want to ask why. Back then, you were the one who respected and admired the people of the Bazin Kendo ground the most. But why were you able to make Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiu trust you so much? Moreover, other than being somewhat tolerant of everyone, you didn't do anything else. If you were like those marquises who like to fight for power, then so be it. But I know you well. Back then, you were a fatty who liked to eat and wait for death. Mount Hung Marquis Su took a deep breath. He slowly exhaled, glanced at her, and then looked up at the sky. He said, I am a fatty who does not have many pursuits, but respect and kindness are different things. You should know that back then, Yuanwu blocked a sword for me. Also back then, if he had not led an army for 3 days and nights, our city would have been conquered long ago. My family would have died in that city. Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu trust me not because I have no pursuits, not because I do not sympathize with the people of the Bazin Kendo ground. Mount Hung Marquis, Su said slowly, but they know that I remember this kindness and know that I will repay it. Yi Siling did not speak. Looking at this mountainous fatty, she knew that the two sides' intentions were clear, and there was no room for discussion. Are we going to fight to the death? Mount Hung Marquis Su looked at her and asked. At this time, he had recovered his usual dignified appearance and gave off a domineering presence like a mountain. In the past, his presence had even crushed Yi Siling, but not today. Yi Siling shook his head calmly, with a kind of pride. No need. That day you cut me once. Today, I only need to return a blow so that you cannot leave this door. Chapter 630. Mount Hung Marquis, Su frowned. He looked down at Yi Siling and said, Today, I will not show mercy. Yi Siling smiled charmingly. I do not need you to show mercy. Mount Hung Marquis Su looked at her expression, and a strange light flashed through his eyes. He said, If so, please. Yi Siling looked up slightly. Above Mount Hung Marquis Su was the sky. At this time, the sun was bright, and there were no clouds for thousands of miles. But as she looked, countless crystalline raindrops suddenly appeared in the sky. These sparkling raindrops did not seem to belong to the human world at all. They did not seem to be wet at all. When they fell from the sky, they seemed to violate the laws of nature. Not only did they fall at an unimaginably fast speed, but they were also continuous. It was as if someone was holding the two ends of these raindrops and pulling them to the ground. In an instant, the millions of sparkling raindrops had turned into millions of thin lines. The threads were like thin needles. The thinner they were, the more penetrative they were. Also, these thin threads did not stop. The energy drawn from all directions was still gathering towards the tip of the thin needles. There was an explosion. Along with a deep roar, the air around Marquis Su exploded. With his body as the center, the stone slabs on the ground and the courtyard walls within a radius of several hundred feet were all shattered into powder. His hair danced wildly, and his body swelled more than twice its original size like a demon. Several sword lights, as thick as buckets, flew around him, like dragons in the exploding air and dust. Thousands of lines of rain stabbed into the energy that was expanding and exploding around him. The tips of the lines of rain exploded, but in a moment that only he and Yi Siling could sense, these thin lines seemed to be pulled by his sword lights and wrapped around his sword lights. In an instant, thunderous booms rang out from his sword lights. The lines of rain broke apart and scattered outwards. These lines of rain were formed from a single crystalline raindrop. They were difficult to see with the naked eye. At that moment, they were broken, and the threads became even smaller. However, when they flew out, these broken threads of rain turned into large crystalline splashes. In this alley, there seemed to be countless people using buckets to splash water into the world. Enormous balls of water fell from the sky, washing away the dust in the air and breaking through the black tiles of the roofs. The shattered black tiles flew out of the roofs, and when they landed on the ground, there was a layer of water on the ground. The shattered black tiles stirred up waves in this layer of stagnant water. The black was the pistol, and thousands of splashes bloomed in this alley. Yi Siling, dressed in white robes and white dress, had turned and walked out of the alley. Her shoes were not wet. Just like that day in Changling's rainstorm, she had walked out of the great waves of the Wei River and floated on the water. Marquis Su of Mount Hengshan stood motionless. His body was still surrounded by a terrifying aura. His body was still like a fiend god, more than twice its usual size. Marquis! The door behind him had completely collapsed. Multiple cultivators appeared behind him and shouted at the same time as they looked at Yi Sealing's back. In their view, just now, Marquis Su had defeated Yi Sealing's sword essence. Yi Sealing had openly rebelled. Were they really going to let her go after just one exchange? But what caused their breathing to stop at the same time was that when they shouted, Hengshan Marquis Su spat out a mouthful of blood. His mountainous body suddenly shrunk like air was leaking out of a hole. Mount Hung Marquis Su's body returned to normal size, but his face was waxen yellow. The water in front of him was filled with dots of blood. He looked at Yi Sealing's back as she floated away. His mind and eyes were filled with great shock. Cloud Water Palace. He suddenly understood something. Since the night before, there had been unusual sparks falling from the sky. A Grandmaster had used his life bond energy to send a military report back to Chongling. Chongling appeared to be quiet, but even the common people on the streets knew that something unusual was happening. When the great change occurred, some people in Chongling had been the focus of attention. Among these people, Yi Sealing was definitely the first. So many people did not know of Mount Hung Marquis Su's actions and what he was going to do after leaving the establishment. But many people knew of Yi Sealing's movements. When Yi Sealing stopped Mount Hung Marquis Su and attacked him, in the eyes of many people, Yi Sealing had become Chongling's enemy, or rather, a dead man. Chongling's streets were connected in all directions, but at many points there were tall turrets. These turrets monitored all movements in Chongling. When the water outside the Su Marquisate establishment flowed, and Yi Sealing turned to leave on a turret closest to the Su Marquisate establishment, the vest of a general was soaked in cold sweat. This experienced general's hands started to tremble, but just as Marquis Su said, sympathy and respect were one thing, and one's position was another. This general naturally did not want to abandon Chongling and become the enemy of the Qin dynasty. So after a moment of hesitation, he attacked. He was the owner of this turret. He knew better than anyone the true reason these turrets had been set up back then. These turrets had been the product of an astounding idea. When the energies of some powerful otherworldly items were gathered through seal crystals, the light produced could cause some of the primal energies of the universe to distort unnaturally. Then these light rays could be projected to any corner of Chongling like moonlight. This was the falling dark moon. Everyone who walked in Chongling had a sword hanging above their head that could appear at any time. This kind of seal weapon had once been made by the craftsmen of the Bazin Kendo ground. It had been put aside after the Great Change, before Yuan Wu's ascension, but after the Deer Mountain Conference, all the cultivators in the world knew that this kind of seal weapon had been successfully made. In the depths of every corner tower, the most crucial talisman crystals had been embedded in the incomparably stable formations. If this general gave the order, the seal crystals would release dark and vicious energy that would fill the entire formation. Then a crescent moon sword light would rise from the turret and head towards Yi Sealing. The power of this falling dark moon would not reach Realm 7, but would not be lower than Realm 6. What Realm 7 cultivators feared about it was that it would come continuously. The cultivator being attacked would be tired and unable to hide. The formations of all the turrets were connected. The energy produced by the seal crystals would continuously flood into the formations of the turrets closest to the cultivator. In any corner of Chongling, the falling dark moon would endlessly attack until the cultivator's vital energy was used up, or they were killed. A finger-shaped gray crystal appeared in the general's hand. The moment the vital essence in his body poured into the gray crystal, he slapped the gray crystal into the center of a metal plate in front of him. Chapter 6:31. This gray crystal was the key to this turret's formation. When his vital energy gathered and entered this formation, the turret's formation would be completely activated. However, in this fraction of time, the moment this gray crystal appeared in his hand, a cloud of gray dust fell down from the beam above his head and landed on the back of his neck. This was just an insignificant speck of dust, so light even cultivators wouldn't notice it. However, when it landed on the back of this officer's neck, this officer's body seemed to have been crushed by a giant mountain. With a bang, he fell to the ground, producing a blast of energy. The gray crystal in the general's hand hit the edge of the metal plate in front of him, giving off a crisp sound and creating sparks. His face and eyes seemed to be deeply imprinted by the light of the gray crystal and turned an eerie gray. Several shrill sounds of breaking through the air rang out. Several beams of sword light shot towards the beam above, attacking a figure that was almost one with the black-gray beam and the roof. The swordsmen behind the general attacked in anger and shock. They could not understand what kind of poison this was that could instantly destroy the body and mind of a Realm 6 cultivator. Who was it that could silently sneak into the top of this turret? Astrology Bureau. But when they saw this figure that seemed to be one with the surroundings, these swordsmen reacted. The academician of the Astrology Bureau, the 6 academicians of the Astrology Bureau, were all mysterious cultivators. But these cultivators were cultivators of the Qin dynasty, and not Yi Sealing's own cultivators. Were all these people rebelling with Yi Sealing? Pew, 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 several sword lights, accompanied by their shocked and angry gazes, all landed in the air. There were a few more holes in the eaves. Sunlight shone through these holes, forming bright beams of light. The general on the ground was no longer breathing. The academician of the Astrology Bureau, who had been on the beam, had disappeared into the shadows below the turret. When the multiple flying swords furiously circled in the air, the faint figure that had slowly merged with the color of the surrounding streets bowed towards the top of the turret, as though he was apologizing. The several flying swords created countless whirlpools below the turret, but they only passed through the figure of the academician of the Astrology Bureau. The swordsmen controlling the flying swords did not care about the academician of the Astrology Bureau. They knew that the person they had to stop today was Yi Sealing, but the surrounding turrets still did not move. Those gray crystals were the keys to activating the formations on the corner towers. Every guard on the corner tower had one. Even though the guard on the corner tower was dead, and no one knew how to use these crystals to activate the formations, as long as any guard on the corner tower activated the formations, all of the formations on the corner towers would be completely activated. Then what was happening on the turrets that should have been discovered? Do not move. On the turret closest to this turret, the general was gripping the gray crystal in his sleeve. But at this time, a deputy general who was usually closest to him whispered by his ear, "If you do not move, you may be punished and demoted. But if you move, your case in Spring Wind Alley will be exposed. You may not be able to leave the great floating water prison for the rest of your life." The general's body suddenly froze, and his hand holding the gray crystal could not exert any more strength. The Astrology Bureau had already found out that he had killed an important figure of the Marquis Dugu's household in a fight over a woman in the Spring Breeze Alley. The fact that the deputy general behind him had been used by the Astrology Bureau was even more shocking and unbelievable. "You are also from the Astrology Bureau?" He slowly and stiffly turned his head, glanced at the deputy general, and said in a voice only the two of them could hear. The deputy general looked in the direction Yi Sealing's figure was walking and said in a voice only the two of them could hear, "It is not important if I am from the Astrology Bureau. What is important is that even if Yi Sealing leaves Chongling, the power of her Astrology Bureau will still exist in Chongling. If you want to live well, do not do extreme things to her." Many shrill voices came from the ground in the distance. This sound was like the shrill wails of many women buried alive, and the voice of longing for revenge. The turrets started to tremble slightly. Unusual dark and cold clouds appeared in the clouds above. The edges of the dark clouds were twisting, as if countless malicious ghosts were trying to crawl out of them. Everyone in Chongling was alarmed. Most people were panicked and did not know what was happening. Yet, all the nobles and cultivators who knew what was happening felt an unnatural chill in their hearts. The formations of all the turrets had been activated, but even the turrets closest to where Yi Sealing and Marquis Su were fighting did not react first. These turrets had intricate arrangements and defenses that outside cultivators could not imagine. To be able to silently take care of 5 or 6 turrets meant that the female bureau chief of the Astrology Bureau was not as dispirited as the outside world thought. Her hidden power had reached a terrifying level. This was the reason she had to stay in Chongling for so many years. What was most shocking was her cultivation and power. The method that Marquis Su cultivated allowed him to release terrifying amounts of vital energy and primal energies of the universe in an instant. If both sides only used one move in a situation like this, then the power of his move would be terrifying. Yet the result of his fight with Yi Sealing was that he was seriously injured. Yi Sealing floated away as though nothing had happened. Then in Chongling, how many people could stop her alone? Yi Sealing floated through the streets. She didn't seem to be walking very quickly, but there was water vapor continuously forming in the streets and alleys, continuously turning into mist, slowly becoming a thick white mist. She heard the strange sounds from the turrets and knew that the falling dark moon formation had been activated. Yet she was not in a hurry. That was because she had already bought enough time. This time was enough for her presence to disappear from the senses of the guards and the surrounding cultivators. At this time, she suddenly looked up and sensed starlight flashing in the sky. She narrowed her eyes slightly, but then a disdainful expression appeared at the corners of her mouth. In the Chongling Imperial Palace, Zhang Xiu was afraid. She had no misgivings and did not need to hide anything. So at this time, when Zhang Xiu could still sense a threat of her presence, Zhang Xiu did not dare to attack her. She proudly walked through the streets. The white mist gradually covered her body. The surrounding streets were silent as though this was an empty city. Chapter 632. When the formations in the turrets were activated, the courtyard where Chief Inspector Chen of the Divinity Bureau was filled with many officials of the Divinity Bureau who were usually not seen. Before boarding the carriage, Chief Inspector Chen gave a series of simple and quick orders. Most of these orders were targeted at the Astrology Bureau, including the assassination of some important people of the Astrology Bureau and the quick takeover of some organizations. These orders contained careful planning and a great understanding of the Astrology Bureau. Most of the orders needed the documents of the Empress and the 2 prime ministers to be carried out. Yet, none of the Divinity Bureau officials standing in the yard felt this was unusual. Ever since Yuan Wu ascended the throne more than a decade ago, the greatest meaning of the Divinity Bureau's existence was to one day swallow up the Astrology Bureau. Among the Divinity Bureau officials in the courtyard, there were many old people like Mo Qinggong. Old people only corresponded to their years as officials of the Divinity Bureau and did not mean they were truly old. They saw the excited eyes of the newcomers of the Divinity Bureau around them. This kind of timing was a good chance for these young officials. But for these old people, this kind of excitement was morbid. The war on the Qin and Chu border was in full swing. It was unknown who would win. The Astrology Bureau was a great pillar for Chongling. Now, these young officials did not worry about the war at the border, but were thinking about the benefits this battle would bring them in the future. Yet, even an old person like Mo Qinggong did not find anything unusual about Chief Inspector Chen. Yi Xiling was still in Chongling. For Chief Inspector Chen, his everything was in Chongling. But he himself boarded the carriage and started to travel according to the imperial palace's orders to Min Mountain Sword Sect. The reason he obediently accepted this arrangement was because he knew that in this storm in Chongling, only by doing his best to protect Bailey Sushue could he protect Yi Xiling. For the mistress of the imperial palace, Bailey Sushue was more important than Yi Xiling. As long as Bailey Sushue was alive, many people could not leave and could not be used against Yi Xiling. I hope you can live. When the carriage started to speed up, Chief Inspector Chen closed his eyes and slowly said in his heart, I hope I can live too. Living was the lowest demand for the ordinary people of Chongling. They pursued a better life, but for many people who had reached the top, living became their final pursuit. As long as they could live, and the people they cared about could live, they didn't care about the so-called pleasure. Even if they ate the simplest food and wore the roughest clothes, they could still be at ease. A unique rhythmic vibration came from the carriage as it sped along. The man driving the carriage for Chief Inspector Chen was a deaf and mute old servant. The communication between him and Chief Inspector Chen was done by tapping on the carriage with Zhen Yuan flowing out of his fingers. Someone had tried to stop his carriage, and it was only a low-ranking official. His cultivation was only at the fourth realm. Usually, no low-ranking official would dare to stop his carriage. So Chief Inspector Chen opened his eyes again and had the carriage stop. He wanted to hear what this low-ranking official wanted to say to him. Chen Jinci, Minister of Ceremonies. When the carriage stopped, an official of the Divinity Bureau walked out of the alley to the side. He came to his carriage, bowed, and said softly. Chief Inspector Chen stilled slightly. He waved his hand for the Divinity Bureau official to leave, and then looked at the young official, who came close. While this was a low-ranking official of the Bureau of Ceremonies, this was a cultivator who came from the Chun family of Liangjiang Commandery like him. They were on the same family tree, so he knew this young person. This young official was slightly cautious, but when he reached his carriage, he bowed and said softly, "Do not try to attack Marquis Duanmo. That is a trap." Chief Inspector Chen's eyes burned with an unusual flame. He frowned deeply and asked, "Who told you to say such things to me?" The young official said, "Official Shun Xian told me to tell you he is not your enemy." After saying this, the young official raised his head. Then, black blood began to flow out of his mouth. Then, his eyes turned black and black tears began to flow out. Chief Inspector Chen knew that this young official was at the last moment of his life. His usually slow tone suddenly became urgent. Why? Not just because of official Shin Xian, but also because from a certain point of view, official, you are the future of Liangjiang Commandery. You represent the Qin family, so nothing can happen to you. After saying this, the young official fell down and died beside his carriage. Chief Inspector Chen slowly lowered his head. His movements were also abnormally slow as the moss growing slowly in the shadows. Min Mountain Sword Sect. Bailey Sushue walked along the white jade ice path towards the frozen top. The higher the peak of Min Mountain Sword Sect, the colder it was. There was a strange energy rule. The cold energy on the ice path surpassed all the ice and snow in the world and had a strange repelling effect on the outside water vapor. The water vapor in the air would freeze into frost here, but could not fall down. It was pushed away by the cold energy on the mountain path, and then blown away by the wind and floated back into the world. But today, Bailey Sushue's cold energy was thicker than the ice path. With each step, white energy flowed out of his body and landed on the ice path below him. Then it seeped into the unchanging ice until a jade-like color appeared. The mountain wind was as sharp as a knife and could not blow at Bailey Sushua's robes. His hair, under the flow of his own energy, danced rhythmically behind him and naturally had a sacred presence. He looked towards Chongling. Just like many years ago, the sky above Chongling was covered in dark clouds. But unlike back then, most of the dark clouds in Chongling came from the falling moon formation in the corner tower. The dark clouds and chaotic primal energies of the universe back then came from the cultivators of the dynasties who had come to kill Wang Jingming. Suddenly, a scornful and cold smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. The world around Min Mountain Sword Sect was still calm, but he knew the changes here would soon surpass Chongling at this moment. Back then, countless people had wanted to kill Wang Jingming. Now, countless people had come to kill him. He was very proud, because no one in the world misjudged him and knew his intentions. He was such a clear-cut person. He did not forgive Wang Jingming back then, but no matter what he did, he followed his heart. Chapter 633. When he moved his gaze away from the highest point of the mountain and no longer looked towards Chongling, a thread of life-bond vital energy flowed out of his body. This life-bond vital energy was exceptionally condensed and fundamentally different from the vital energy that had seeped into the ice path under his feet. It had a special feeling like a part of his vitality and a part of his cultivation had been condensed into this life bond vital energy. This extremely condensed life bond vital energy slowly flowed down the ice path. From its initial pure and colorless state, it seemed to be tainted by the indigo color of the ice path, turning into indigo flowing water. It also drew out a part of the base power of the formation in the ice path, and then flowed into an ice room below the ice path. The door of the ice room was then covered with countless fine cracks like a spider web. In the next moment, the ice door completely shattered into countless sharp ice shards that sputtered outwards. Inside the ice room was Xie Ro, who was cultivating in seclusion. Her entire body was originally wrapped in sparkling and translucent ice crystals, as if she was in a deep sleep, but at this moment, her eyes opened. There was a flash of light in her chi-si. In her perception, it was as if she had suddenly arrived at the seaside and saw a vast mirage, but she couldn't see it clearly. In the next moment, she seemed to see the shadow of a sword, but she couldn't touch it. She was shocked. She could not understand the profound changes here, but she was certain that some astounding opportunity had occurred. Do you know why I only chose you and Jing Lioli as my personal students out of so many students? Bailey Sushua stood at the end of the ice path and looked at her. He seemed to be standing in the clouds, standing in the wind, his figure enormous. I do not know, Xie Ro said nervously. The first answer that appeared in her mind was because she was the eldest daughter of the Guanzhong Xie family, and the Xie family was rich enough to rival a country. But her subconscious told her that this was not the correct answer. Jing Lioli undoubtedly has the best talent of the younger generation of cultivators in Chongling, but from a certain point of view, your personality is more like mine. Bailey Sushua looked at Xie Ro, who did not dare to stand up, and said simply, so she can accept Min Mountain Sword Sect's inheritance. But you can accept my inheritance. Xie Ro was terrified and instinctively said, do you not represent Min Mountain Sword Sect? Bailey Sushua said matter-of-factly, of course I can represent Min Mountain Sword Sect, but Min Mountain Sword Sect cannot represent me. Xie Ro looked at his cold and proud face under the sunlight and finally understood what he meant. For someone like him to become the master of Min Mountain Sword Sect, he had some unique things. Some things that Min Mountain Sword Sect could not teach him. To a sect, this was a true grandmaster. I've already taught you everything I should. Bailey Sushua glanced at her, and then turned away, not looking at her. But before you truly comprehend, do not let others know your identity. Sierra was stunned. She didn't quite understand what he meant. What did he mean by her identity? Bailey Sushua's lips curled up proudly. He did not explain because he knew that after today, she would naturally understand. Leave the mountain gates. Someone will take you out. He waved his sleeve, and a green light flashed. A patch of green light appeared in front of Sierra's eyes, but in the next moment, the scenery in front of her completely changed. She was no longer on the peak, but in a valley where Bailey Sushua could not be seen. There was a sea of brambles in this valley, the obstacle she had passed in the Min Mountain sword trials. The ice room she had been cultivating and had completely disappeared with the patch of green light. The ice that had turned to powder was blown away by the wind and disappeared into the world without leaving a trace. Bailey Sushua stood at the end of the ice path with his hands behind his back. In front of him was the void. The peak returned to silence. After an unknown period of time, there were some disturbances in various parts of Min Mountain Sword Sect, and then quickly calmed and returned to deathly silence. Suddenly, in the middle of the green jade path leading to the summit, a dazzling red light flashed. It was as if countless blooming flowers had been forcefully stuffed into a cramped world. Bailey Sushua seemed to not sense it, and still stood silently with his hands behind his back. After a long time, clear footsteps sounded from below the ice path, and then bright red slowly appeared among the white ice and snow. A general dressed in bright red armor and carrying many swords on his back finally forced his way through this motionless world and appeared on the peak. This was a very handsome middle-aged man. He was thin, but his face was a little too pale. Many swords of different colors bloomed behind him like a peacock spreading its tail, more grand than any cape in the world. I had not expected to come up so easily. Bailey Sushua, you are too proud. This middle-aged man looked at Bailey Sushua's dazzling and blurry figure in the light and said, the two sentences he said seemed simple, but to people like him and Bailey Sushua, they contained many powerful emotions and intentions. Bailey Sushua still did not look back at him and said coolly, then do you dare to attack me? This middle-aged man's breathing suddenly stopped, and an unusual flush appeared on his pale face. In the next moment, his breathing grew heavy. He had deliberately provoked Bailey Sushua and suffered the other's most direct disdain. He was naturally furious, but he could not attack. Bailey Sushua was standing there motionlessly with his hands behind his back, but he could not capture his presence. It was as if he had become one with the mountain and the sky, and he could exist anywhere. Even if he could instantly use many swords, if he could not lock onto the other's presence, his sword could not truly touch Bailey Sushua's body. Everyone knew that Bailey Sushua was very proud, but just by standing there, he was able to make a marquis of the Qin dynasty, so angry that he could not attack. This was the basis for his pride. Anger, but not being able to attack, was helplessness and discouragement. The bright light of this middle-aged man's armor and sword quickly dimmed, like a blooming flower about to wither. His pale face started to darken. He understood why the mistress of the imperial palace did not want him to come up the mountain from the start, and wanted him to stay with Marquis Li at the foot of the mountain. She did not let him come up the mountain, not just because she did not want him to share too much of the benefits, but because she was sure from the start that he and Bailey Sushua were too different and could not even force Bailey Sushua to attack. At this time, the wind on the peak seemed to be pulled away by someone, and the sound of the wind suddenly disappeared. Even a corner of the flowing clouds above him seemed to have been bent. A strange light fell down, landing on his body, illuminating his gloomy face. Chapter 634. As this unusual light landed, a middle-aged man dressed in white jade robes silently appeared on the other side of the ice path. His face and figure were very ordinary, but the aura he exuded was exceptionally clean. As a result, his body naturally couldn't be transparent like a crystal or some clean gemstones, but the feeling he gave any cultivator was that he was completely transparent and pure to the extreme. The middle-aged man in bright red armor, who had arrived before him, was Marquis Dugu. But when he came next to Marquis Dugu, he did not bow and did not even say a word. Because he was also a marquis, he was Marquis Duanmu, who was equal to Marquis Dugu. His son was Duanmu Jingzhou, who had appeared in the Min Mountain sword trials, and Li Shixing's enemy since childhood. The two marquises of the Qin dynasty were gathered. When he stood next to Marquis Dugu, the unusual light from the clouds still shone on Marquis Dugu. An exceptionally clean presence was eager in the surrounding air, and a cheerful feeling swept away the haze around Marquis Dugu. Marquis Dugu naturally understood what the other meant. He looked up again and looked straight at Bailey Sushua, who seemed to be standing in the clouds. The sword on his back gave off blinding rays of light, like a peacock spreading its tail. Two enormous presences surged towards the top of the ice peak. When these two enormous presences surged towards his feet, Bailey Sushua's lips curled up proudly. A thread of cold presence flowed out of the depths of the ice path, under his feet, into his palm. A glowing snowflake appeared in his hand. This glowing snowflake flew towards the void in front of him. There seemed to be an invisible bolt of lightning in the sky, and the light coming down from the clouds was easily torn apart. In the next moment, the mountain wind was the same, and the absolute stillness disappeared. Everything was no different from before. As though nothing had happened, Marquis Dugu and Marquis Duanmu were completely silent and stood motionless. The two's faces were as calm as an ancient well, as if their luster had only dimmed a little. However, their hearts were like raging waves, especially Marquis Dugu, who shouldn't have appeared here in the first place. He wanted to test Bailey Sushua's sword. Originally, in his imagination, even if he was not as good as Bailey Sushua, the difference would not be too great. But now, even with Marquis Duanmu, they still could not force Bailey Sushua to attack. Bailey Sushua was already so strong. Then, in this killing situation decided by Zheng Xiu and Yuan Wu, who would be the one to deliver the killing sword? Outside Min Mountain Sword Sect, at the foot of the southern slope, a small shallow lake formed because of the increasing spring rain. This shallow lake that would disappear in the summer had originally been inside the formation of Min Mountain Sword Sect and would not have appeared. However, as Marquis Dugu climbed the mountain, some of the yuan qi that obstructed the view of the outside world disappeared. Many scenes appeared clearly in everyone's sight. On one side of this shallow lake, there was an army stationed. This army belonged to the Hengshan Divine Treasure Army of Marquis Su. The generals at the front were famous grandmasters of Chongling. At this time, the gazes of these generals passed through the shallow lake and landed in the forest at the foot of the mountain behind the lake. Their expressions grew stern as though they sensed something was happening there. Deep in the forest, a small and thin cultivator was walking. This cultivator was dressed in loose, dark black robes. He wore a bamboo hat that covered his face, so it was impossible to see his appearance. Just as the generals of the Divine Treasure Army had stern expressions, the soft cloth soles of this cultivator's feet suddenly gave off a metallic sound as they rubbed against the fallen leaves. Thousands of withered leaves flew out like snow with an exceptionally violent presence. Dozens of ancient trees were torn to pieces by the withered leaves. as a sword light lit up and stopped this violent presence from spreading. Marquis Lee's figure appeared on a rock facing this cultivator. "It's you." Looking at Marquis, Lee dressed in light gold armor. This cultivator gave a sharp female voice. Hearing this voice, Marquis Lee could not help but sigh inwardly at the power of the mistress of the imperial palace. "I will not go up the mountain. You do not go up the mountain either." He knew the other did not have patience, so he looked directly at this Chun woman dressed in black robes and said, "The person who could casually release a sword energy with such an innate, ruthless aura was none other than Ji Qingqing, the young master of the Qin kingdom whose face was disfigured." Hearing Marquis Lee's words, she snorted violently, but before she could speak, Marquis Lee said, "I do not want to fight to the death with you. Also, you are very lucky today. Originally, the people of the Marquis Dugu establishment were going to wait for you here with me." Ji Qingqing's breathing suddenly stopped. At this time, many soft sounds came from the forest behind Marquis Lee. A cold gray fog quietly spread out. Along with the spreading gray fog, 9 riders covered in black spiked armor appeared behind Marquis Lee. They looked as if they were made of metal. Behind these 9 riders, there was still the sound of metal clanging like a tide. Even more fully armored soldiers filled the empty space in the forest. Looking at the 9 nether armor riders and the nether armor army filling her sight, Ji Qingqing's violent presence stopped spreading. She knew that since the 9 nether armor riders had all been transferred over, then even if she fought to the death here, she could not enter Min Mountain Sword sect. Zheng Xiu predicted that I would come to Min Mountain Sword sect because Bailey Sushua spoke for me. I have a reason to come here and fight for him. Her gaze seemed to pass through the falling leaves. She said coldly to Marquis Lee, "What about you? You cannot even protect your son. What reason do you have to fight for your life here? There is no eternal hatred, only eternal benefit." Marquis Lee turned to look at the riders in black armor behind him and said, "The Lee Marquis establishment was not built by me alone. The Lee Marquis establishment naturally cannot exist for my son alone. I want to kill you very much. I will find a chance to kill you." Ji Qingqing looked at Marquis Lee and said, "All the fallen leaves once again shot up from the ground." Ji Qingqing's figure continuously retreated, and in an instant she disappeared into the forest. But the terrifying murderousness she gave off still wrapped around the forest, tearing all the leaves to powder and hitting Marquis Lee and the nether armor army behind him like a wave. Marquis Lee's light gold armor lit up with sparks. His body gave off a sound like waves hitting rock, but he did not look in the direction Ji Qingqing's figure had disappeared. He looked at the top of Min Mountain Sword sect and was thinking the same question as Marquis Dugu. If no one could make Bailey Sushua act now, then who had the power to make Bailey Sushua act? In front of the main gates of Min Mountain Sword sect, there were many pieces of red armor that flowed down the green mountain path along with blood. Multiple cultivators pressed their life-bond swords and watched motionlessly as the blood flowed over their shoes. Suddenly, they turned around and held their breaths. 2 gray palanquins appeared on the path behind them. Chapter 635. These 2 gray palanquins were actually very ordinary, but the people who could appear here today were not ordinary cultivators. These cultivators guarding the gates of Min Mountain Sword sect with their life-bond swords were academicians of the Qin dynasty's imperial palace. They knew that these 2 ordinary gray palanquins came from the imperial palace. According to the rules of the Qin dynasty, the generals leading the army used chariots, some of the officials who were generals used carriages and non-generals, and some nobles used palanquins. The palanquins that came from the imperial palace were of higher status than these academicians. Then the people in these two gray palanquins could only be the two ministers. Minister Yen and Minister Li's status had always been above the bureau chiefs and marquises. Their status was completely based on their own power and the power they held. Everyone in the world knew of the power of the two ministers of the Qin dynasty. But because they were so aloof and seemed to be on a completely different level from the nobility, no one had thought that they would come. No one had thought that these two ministers would come in person and fight as cultivators. As the two palanquins came closer, looking at the tokens hanging on the sides of the palanquins, these cultivators grew more shocked. Their chests were suppressed by an invisible pressure, so they could not breathe normally. Marquis Li was waiting in the forest. A rider in nether armor came next to him and reported the situation of the two palanquins passing through the gates of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Marquis Li's cold expression did not seem to change, but his eyebrows slowly rose. The ruthless aura that had previously pervaded this secluded forest seemed to have dyed the tip of his brow. Bailey Sushue stood silently at the top of the ice peak, waiting for the arrival of the two palanquins. Even though many soldiers, many hidden academicians, and even some of the Marquis's subordinates who rarely returned to Chongling had surrounded Min Mountain Sword Sect, this did not seem to affect his mind at all. His mind was still clear, and he was one with the world. His figure was there, but his presence was nowhere to be found. The two palanquins had appeared in Marquis Duanmu and Marquis Dugu's perception, but these two powerful marquises did not feel relaxed. They became more focused, beads of sweat the size of soybeans dripping off their foreheads. Leaving no trace meant they could not attack. Most importantly, they did not know when Bailey Sushue would attack. "You're late." When the two palanquins finally reached the flat ground at the peak, Bailey Sushue slowly turned around. He seemed to have expected the two would come and said disdainfully, "On the way, we met Master Qi of Lingshu Sword Gate. Although we couldn't stop him, we still wasted some time." A gentle voice came from the gray palanquin on the left. When this voice sounded, the two palanquins had already stopped, and the door curtains were lifted from the inside at almost the same time. The person who walked out of the palanquin on the left had an extremely gentle face. There was warmth between his brows, making people feel close to him. His stature was also average, neither tall nor short. Most importantly, the aura on his body was also very ordinary, not giving people a sense of oppression. The person who walked out of the palanquin on the right was completely different from him. It could even be said that he was the complete opposite of him. This was a man who looked to be in his 50s. He was tall and had a broad frame. He wore a black robe that hung on his body like a dark cloud. His facial features were also very fierce, especially his very tall and sharp nose, which made him look like a huge eagle that was ready to hunt at any time. The one with a gentle face was Minister Li. The one who looked like a black eagle at any time was Minister Yen. This was a simple and accurate description of these two officials in some books in the streets of Chongling. "Not late. We came up too easily, earlier than I expected. You were too arrogant, or rather, you are as stupid as Wang Jingming." The personalities and conduct of these two ministers seemed to be completely different. The Master Qi that Minister Li spoke of was naturally Qi Jinshan of Lingshu Sword Gate. He was one of the 5 people of Lingshu Sword Gate. While he had calmly said that he had encountered Master Qi by chance and forced the other away, there had been a dangerous fight, but he admitted that he had wasted time and had come late. But when Minister Yen spoke, his tone harsh, he did not admit to coming late, but said he had come early. Only the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect can save Min Mountain Sword Sect. What can the rest of the scattered people do? His tone was harsh and very rude, echoing like a blade on the mountain peak. But we did not even encounter Qin Yaoyin and the others on the way. You sent them all out. Who else can save Min Mountain Sword Sect? I can represent Min Mountain Sword Sect, but Min Mountain Sword Sect is not just me, Bailey Sushua responded, interested in talking to him. We do not care who is who, we only care about getting rid of people as strong as you. Minister Yen did not disguise and said harshly, no matter if such people exist in other dynasties or in our dynasty. Your view is the same as mine. Hearing these words, Bailey Sushua smiled, and then said, but people will die when they grow old. These experts of the previous generation will die in the end. Even more importantly, after these experts of the previous generation die, who will leave behind stronger experts of the new generation. Everyone understood the meaning of Bailey Sushua's words. The mountain wind on the ice peak seemed to have suddenly become tyrannical. The mountain wind that blew through the void even produced the sound of fluttering war flags. The two ministers' expressions were solemn but did not change much. But Marquis Duanmu and Marquis Dugu, who had been sweating profusely, suddenly paled. Many marquises had led their troops secretly to Chongling, and even some powerful cultivators from other dynasties had been bribed with great benefits. This was a trap aimed at Min Mountain Sword Sect and Bailey Sushua. But Bailey Sushua never thought of leaving. However, this was also his killing trap. The mountain wind suddenly blew fiercely, and the cold air became thicker. In the wind, sparkling and translucent ice shards appeared. These ice shards emitted a faint green jade luster, as if they were made of crushed green jade. The air was filled with the smell of destruction. Everyone around the mountain, including the nobility of Chongling, were thinking if Min Mountain Sword Sect ceased to exist after today, and Bailey Sushua died, what kind of change would it bring to the Qin dynasty and the world? Yet no one thought that there were two marquises and two ministers on this mountain peak. If these two ministers died at the same time, what kind of turmoil would it cause to Chongling and the Qin dynasty? You are proud enough. Prime Minister Yen took a deep breath. When he lowered his head, his face was that of a man in his 50s. But when he raised his head, while his face became even more sinister, he seemed to quickly become younger with this breath. He looked at Bailey Sushua with narrowed eyes and said, if so, what are you waiting for? You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.